Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Nexus 616. Get comfortable because today's story is what if Harry was a Basilisk Animagus and killed the Hungarian Horntail with a single stare. If you find joy in these stories, please like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement keeps this channel alive. Without wasting any time, let's start. Chapter 1, The Killing Gaze. The tunnel smelled like it always did, wet stone and something older, something that lived in the gaps between the rocks like memory fossilized into mineral. Harry dropped the last 12 feet from the pipe opening, landed in a crouch on the bone-littered floor, and straightened without brushing himself off. He'd stopped caring about the rat skeletons months ago. The Chamber of Secrets opened before him in all its cathedral darkness. The serpent pillars rose like the ribs of some buried leviathan, torchlight catching on the carved scales in ripples of green and shadow. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a metronome he'd grown so used to that silence actually felt louder. Dobby was already there, sitting cross-legged on a conjured cushion beside a neat stack of towels. "Harry Potter is early tonight," the elf said, ears twitching. "Couldn't sleep." Dobby is not surprised. "Tomorrow is, I know what tomorrow is." He pulled off his shoes, then his socks. The stone was cold against his bare feet, and the cold traveled up through his ankles, along his calves, settling somewhere behind his sternum like a second heartbeat slowing down. He'd learned early that the transformation came easier when he could feel the earth. Something about the contact, skin to stone, warmth meeting cold, bridged the gap between what he was and what he could become. "You is not having to do it this way," Dobby said quietly. "There is other ways to fight a dragon." Dobby has been reading, "I know, Dobby. Summoning charms is very effective against, I know." Harry walked to the center of the chamber, past the spot where Tom Riddle had stood, past the place where Ginny had nearly died, past the stain on the stone that might have been blood or might have been something else entirely. He stopped in the open space between the last pair of serpent columns and Slytherin's great stone face. But other ways leave room for things to go wrong. Other ways mean I'm a 14-year-old boy fighting a 40-foot dragon with a stick. This way, I'm something that eats dragons. Dobby made a small, unhappy sound but didn't argue further. He'd had this argument with Harry Potter many times over the past year and had lost every single one. Not because Harry Potter was stubborn, though he was, terribly, magnificently stubborn, but because Harry Potter was right and Dobby was honest enough to know it. Harry closed his eyes. Breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. The cold in his chest expanded, and he let it. The first time this had happened, he'd been 13, lying on the narrow bed at number 4 Privet Drive with the window open to catch any trace of breeze in the suffocating July heat. He'd been dreaming about the chamber, always the chamber, and had woken to find his forearm covered in scales. Not metaphorical scales, not a rash that sort of looked like scales if you squinted. Actual scales, dark emerald green, smooth as river stones and hard as fingernails, running from his wrist to his elbow in a perfect sleeve. He'd screamed. Silently, because screaming aloud in the Dursley household after midnight meant consequences, but his mouth had been open and his lungs had been emptying, and if sound could have come out it would have peeled the wallpaper. He'd clamped his other hand over the scales and felt them there, real, solid, for approximately 45 seconds before they faded back to skin. He hadn't slept for 3 days after that. By the 4th day, his eyes had started doing it. Not the scales, the color. He'd been brushing his teeth and had glanced up at the cracked mirror above the sink, and the eyes looking back at him were gold. Not hazel, not amber, not some poetic shade of almost green but not quite. Gold like a coin. Gold like a flame. Gold like the eyes of the thing that had nearly killed him in the chamber, the great dead serpent whose venom was apparently still working through his blood, rewriting him cell by cell into something that the wizarding world classified as XXXXX, wizard killer, impossible to domesticate or train. He'd spent the rest of that summer at war with his own body. The scales came and went, triggered by emotion, anger brought them fastest, but fear worked too, and once, horribly, the cold satisfaction of watching Dudley trip over his own feet on the stairs. His eyes flickered gold whenever he felt what he'd started to think of as the clarity, moments when the world slowed down and everything became very simple and very clear and his mind went quiet the way a hunting cat's mind goes quiet before the pounce. He'd told no one. Not Ron, not Hermione, not Dumbledore, not anyone. He'd smiled his way through the start of third year, retreated to the chamber at every opportunity. Myrtle had been useful exactly once, showing him the route from the bathroom, and begun the long, terrifying process of figuring out what he was becoming. The answer, when he'd finally assembled it from restricted section books smuggled out under the invisibility cloak and fragments of Parseltongue carved into the chamber's walls, had been simple and catastrophic. The basilisk's venom had tried to kill him. The phoenix tears had tried to save him. They'd met in his bloodstream like two currents in a river and created something that shouldn't have existed, a magical hybrid that was neither purely venom nor purely healing but a third thing, something alchemical. His magic had responded the way magic always responds to fundamental change, it adapted. It gave him a form that could contain what he'd become. He was a Basilisk Animagus. The only one alive, as far as he could tell. Possibly the only one who had ever existed through accident rather than design. His first full transformation had been in the chamber on a cold night in November of third year, with Dobby standing watch and a stolen bottle of calming draught in his pocket just in case. The pain had been extraordinary, his bones had stretched and multiplied, his skin had split and reformed, his skull had elongated and his jaw had unhinged and his legs had fused and his spine had extended 60 feet in a direction that his human brain couldn't quite process. He'd screamed, and the scream had become a hiss, and the hiss had echoed through the chamber in Parseltongue and said things he hadn't meant to say, old words, hungry words. He'd spent 4 minutes as a 60-foot serpent, thrashing against the stone floor, before he'd managed to wrench himself back to human form and vomit spectacularly on Dobby's shoes. The elf had cleaned himself without complaint, offered Harry a towel, and said, "Dobby thinks we will need more towels." That had been the beginning. In the 14 months since, Harry had transformed 431 times. He tracked them in a notebook he kept hidden in the chamber, logging duration, difficulty, and, most importantly, mental clarity. The first 100 transformations had been battles. The basilisk mind was vast and cold and driven by instincts that had no human analog. It didn't think in words. It thought in categories: threat, prey, territory, mate, irrelevant. The first time Harry had transformed and looked at Dobby through the basilisk's eyes, the elf had registered as irrelevant, and some deep, horrible part of Harry's new brain had slid one category to the left and thought, prey, before he'd ripped himself back to human form and sat shaking in the dark for an hour. He'd learned control. Slowly, painfully, the way you learn to swim by drowning over and over until your body finally understands that it can float. The basilisk mind wasn't his enemy. It was him, a part of him that had always been there, maybe, the part that had faced Voldemort at 11 and a dragon-sized serpent at 12 and 100 Dementors at 13 without ever quite breaking. The cold clarity wasn't corruption. It was focus. The predator's gaze wasn't evil. It was honest. But the eyes could kill. That part was real, and that part he'd had to learn the hard way. He'd killed a rat by accident in Transformation 67. Just a dungeon rat that had wandered too close, and his eyes had found it, and it had died. No spell, no venom, no physical contact. Just the gaze. The basilisk's eyes met the rat's eyes, and the rat's heart stopped, and it fell over like a toy with the batteries pulled out. Harry had turned human and stared at the dead rat for 20 minutes. Then he'd spent the next 6 months learning to control the gaze. How to look without killing. How to dial it back, because there were levels, he'd discovered. Full killing gaze, where eye contact meant death. Partial gaze, reflected or filtered, which petrified rather than killed. And something he'd figured out entirely on his own, a kind of presence that he could project through his eyes in human form, not deadly, not petrifying, but heavy. Commanding. The weight of a predator's attention focused into a stare. He'd practiced on spiders, on rats, on a conjured rooster. The crowing had hurt, a lancing pain behind his eyes, but hadn't killed him, another myth about basilisks that turned out to be exaggerated, or at least didn't apply to Animagi. He'd practiced until he could hold the basilisk form for hours, until the transformation took seconds instead of minutes, until the cold clarity felt less like drowning and more like breathing. He'd told no one. Because the moment he told anyone, he stopped being Harry Potter and started being the boy who could kill with his eyes. And he knew, with the same cold clarity that the basilisk gave him, that the wizarding world would never look at him the same way again. Tomorrow, he was going to stop having a choice about that. Harry opened his eyes. "Stand back," he said. Dobby retreated to his cushion, clutched a towel to his chest, and watched with the wide, lamp-like eyes of an elf who had seen this transformation hundreds of times and had never once stopped being awed by it. Harry let go. The change hit him like a wave, not painful anymore, not after 400 repetitions, but big, a full-body shudder that started at the base of his skull and rolled outward. His skin darkened. His bones sang. The world changed aspect as his eyes shifted, the dim torchlight of the chamber becoming bright and sharp, every detail etched in perfect clarity, the individual crystals in the granite, the hairline fractures in the pillars, the heat signature of the elf on his cushion glowing like a small sun. He grew. His legs fused, his torso elongated, his arms withdrew into his sides and his ribs multiplied and spread along a body that stretched and kept stretching, 30 feet, 40, 50, 60, coiling across the chamber floor in loops of dark emerald muscle. His head was the size of a small car now, his jaws could have swallowed a horse, and his eyes, closed, always closed until he chose to open them, burned behind their lids like furnaces. He tasted the air with a tongue that split the dark and read the chamber's chemical history in a fraction of a second: stone dust, water, elf, magic, old blood, older fear. The basilisk, Harry, still Harry, always Harry even in this form, though the effort of remaining Harry never quite went away, settled his coils and breathed. Good, he thought. Clear tonight. Focused. He practiced for 2 hours. Movement, learning to control 60 feet of body in enclosed spaces without destroying the walls. Speed, striking at conjured targets with a jaw that could close at a force that would crack steel. And, most carefully, most deliberately, the gaze. He opened his eyes and looked at a stone column. Nothing happened. Stone had no life to take. He opened his eyes and looked at a spider on the far wall, 50 yards away, a black speck against gray stone. The spider petrified. Froze mid-step, legs locked, a tiny statue on the wall. Not dead. Petrified. Exactly the level of force Harry had intended. He held the petrification for 30 seconds, then released it. The spider scrambled away. Harry felt a dim flicker of the hunting instinct, prey, small, fleeing, and dismissed it the way you dismiss a stray thought about jumping off a bridge. Acknowledged, irrelevant, gone. Control, he told himself. Always control. He transformed back. The process was faster in this direction, the human body was smaller, simpler, and his magic was eager to return to its default state. He stood naked in the chamber, clothes didn't survive the transformation, he'd learned that the hard way too, and reached for the fresh set that Dobby had laid out. How was it, he asked, pulling on trousers. Dobby considered. Harry Potter's eyes is very controlled tonight. Very precise. Dobby did not feel afraid even once. That's good. But Dobby must say. The elf hesitated, ears drooping. Harry Potter's eyes was also very cold. Colder than usual. Like Harry Potter is already thinking about tomorrow. Harry buttoned his shirt and didn't answer, because Dobby was right. He was already thinking about tomorrow. Morning came the way mornings always come when you're dreading them, too fast and with too much light. Harry lay in his four-poster for a few minutes after waking, listening to Neville's snores and Seamus's sleep muttering, and catalogued his body the way he did every morning. Human. Warm. No scales. Eyes, green, probably. The cold clarity was there, humming at the base of his skull like a low electrical current, but manageable. Always manageable. He got up. Dressed. Went down to breakfast and ate mechanically, 2 pieces of toast, scrambled eggs, pumpkin juice. The great hall was buzzing with excitement. First task today. Everyone was talking about dragons, though they weren't supposed to know about the dragons. Hermione appeared at his elbow, vibrating with anxiety. "Harry, have you prepared? Please tell me you've prepared. What's your plan? You never told me your plan." "Harry, I've got a plan." "What is it?" "You'll see." She stared at him with the expression of someone who was not even slightly reassured. "Harry James Potter, if you go into that arena without a proper strategy, I will, Hermione." He looked at her, and some of what he felt must have shown in his eyes because she stopped talking. "I've been preparing for this for a long time. Longer than you know. I need you to trust me." She searched his face, and he watched her find something there that she couldn't quite identify, a steadiness that hadn't been there before, or maybe had always been there but was more visible now. She exhaled slowly. "I trust you," she said. "But I'm still going to worry." "I know." He almost smiled. "That's your job." Ron was not at breakfast. Ron had not been at breakfast for weeks, not at the Gryffindor table within speaking distance of Harry, anyway. He was down at the far end with Dean and Seamus, eating with the determined focus of someone pretending very hard that he wasn't looking at something. Harry didn't blame him anymore. He'd been angry at first, furious, actually, in a cold and serpentine way that had alarmed him, but the anger had burned out weeks ago and left behind something that just felt tired. Ron thought Harry had cheated his way into the tournament. Ron was wrong. But Ron was also 14 and jealous and scared, and Harry understood all 3 of those things better than he wanted to. He finished his breakfast and went to the champion's tent. The tent was large and drafty, divided into sections by hanging canvas that didn't quite reach the floor. Harry could hear the crowd outside, thousands of people, their collective noise or roar that sounded almost exactly like a dragon if you weren't paying attention. The irony was not lost on him. Cedric Diggory was already there, pacing in his section with the controlled energy of a greyhound before a race. He was pale but composed, his jaw set, his wand in his hand. He nodded at Harry when he entered. "Potter." "Cedric. Any idea what we're facing?" Harry considered lying. It would have been easy, a shrug, a shake of the head, a commiserating look. But Cedric had been decent to him all year, one of the few people who hadn't treated him like a fraud or a freak, and the Basilisk's clarity made dishonesty feel like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. "Dragons," Harry said. Cedric stopped pacing. "You're joking. Nesting mothers. One for each of us. Hagrid showed me, I think Maxime knows too, which means Fleur probably knows. Karkaroff was skulking around the paddock yesterday, so Crumb's probably been told." Cedric processed this with the efficiency of someone who was genuinely intelligent under the Hufflepuff friendliness. "What kind?" "Swedish shortsnout for you, I think. I drew the Hungarian Horntail." "Merlin." Cedric ran a hand through his hair. "The Horntail? I know what it is. Do you have a plan?" Harry looked at him steadily. "Yes." Something in Harry's tone, the quiet certainty, the total absence of fear, made Cedric pause. He studied Harry for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Right. Okay. Thanks for telling me. About the dragons. You should consider the conjunctivitis curse," Harry said. "Aim for the eyes. A blinded dragon can't track you, and the short snout scales are thinner around the face." Cedric blinked. "That's actually really good advice. Good luck. You too, Potter." Cedric hesitated, then added, "Whatever your plan is, I hope it works." It will, Harry thought, and the thought was so cold and certain that it didn't feel entirely human. It will work because I am the thing that dragons are afraid of, and I have spent 14 months making sure I can do this without losing myself in the process. He sat in his section of the tent and waited. Victor Crumb arrived next, moving with the heavy, deliberate gait of someone who was built for a broomstick but forced to operate on the ground. He didn't speak. He sat, pulled out his wand, and began running through what Harry recognized as Bulgarian combat drills, small, precise wand movements practiced at speed. His face was a slab of concentration. Fleur Delacour came last, and Harry noticed her the way you notice a change in air pressure, suddenly, involuntarily, with every sense engaged. She was beautiful. Everyone said that, everyone knew that, and the Vila heritage made it an almost aggressive fact. Her silver blonde hair caught the tent's dim light and turned it into something warmer, her skin seemed to glow faintly from within, and her features were so symmetrical they looked designed rather than grown. Half the boys in Hogwarts couldn't string a sentence together in her presence. The Vila allure rolled off her like heat from a forge, and Harry watched it wash over the tent and felt nothing. He felt absolutely nothing. No fog in his thoughts. No tightening in his chest. No irrational urge to impress her or protect her or offer her things she hadn't asked for. The allure hit the cold clarity in his mind and dissolved like smoke against glass. He found that interesting. Fleur sat in her section, spine straight, chin lifted. She was nervous, he could see it in the microtension of her jaw and the way her fingers pressed white against her wand, but she wore her composure like armor. She caught Harry watching her and raised one eyebrow in a look that was equal parts challenge and question. Harry nodded to her. A small gesture. Respectful, not sycophantic. She seemed mildly surprised, as if she'd been expecting something else, the stammering, probably, or the vacant stare, and nodded back. Then Bagman was in the tent, bright-eyed and manic, explaining the task with the enthusiasm of a man who'd bet heavily on the outcome. Golden eggs. Nesting dragons. You just need to collect the egg, that's the goal, nothing to worry about, we've got the best dragon handlers in the world standing by. He offered a silk bag. Each champion drew a miniature dragon, animated, snarling, barely bigger than a lizard. Cedric got the short snout. Fleur pulled the common Welsh green. Crumb drew the Chinese fireball. Harry reached in and felt the tiny Horntail bite his finger. He pulled it out and held it up. It thrashed and spat a spark of flame the size of a match head, its tail whipping around its body in a defensive coil. The number 4 hung from its neck on a tiny chain. He'd go last. The wait was the hardest part. Harry sat alone in his section and listened to the crowd and tried not to think about what was coming. Not the dragon was the easy part, the part he'd trained for, the part that his cold inner predator had already reduced to a simple equation, apex meets apex, one walks away, and I am the king of serpents. No. What came after was the hard part. The screaming, the questions, the fear on people's faces, the prophet articles, the ministry inquiries, the inevitable moment when Hermione looked at him and couldn't quite hide the flinch. He'd kept this secret for 14 months. In approximately 30 minutes, it would belong to the world. Hermione appeared at the tent flap, breaking every rule. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she was breathing hard, and she crossed the space between them in 3 steps and hugged him with a ferocity that drove the air from his lungs. I know you said to trust you, she said into his shoulder. But I had to come. I had to, it's okay. Promise me you'll be careful. He put his arms around her and held her for a moment, and the warmth of the contact pushed the cold clarity back to a manageable distance, and he was just Harry, just a boy being hugged by his best friend before doing something terrifying. I need to tell you something, he said. After the task. I need to tell you something important, and you're going to have questions, and I promise I'll answer all of them. But right now I need you to go sit down and watch. She pulled back and looked at him. Harry, you're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. But it's going to be okay. She left. He watched her go and felt the cold settle back into place, precise and necessary. A cannon blast. Cedric was up. Harry listened through the canvas. The crowd's roar, individual shouts lost in the mass noise, the distant sound of dragon fire and shattering rock. It went on for a long time, 15 minutes, 20. Then a surge of cheering. Cedric had done it, apparently. Alive, at least, though the commentator, Bagman, mentioned something about burns. Fleur next. The crowd noise shifted, more gasps, less sustained cheering. Something went wrong partway through. Harry heard Bagman's voice spike with alarm before the crowd drowned him out. But she survived. The cheering came eventually, ragged and relieved. Crumb. Shorter. More explosive. The ground actually shook at one point, and Crumb emerged from the arena trailing smoke, his robes singed, his expression carved from granite. He said nothing as he passed through the tent. Then it was Harry's turn. He stood. Felt the earth through his shoes. Breathed. The cold clarity opened inside him like a flower made of ice, and the world sharpened until he could count the individual threads in the canvas tent flap. His heart rate dropped. His breathing slowed. The noise of the crowd became a single undifferentiated sound, like wind or water, and beneath it he could hear, or feel, the distinction was blurry in this state, the deep, percussive heartbeat of something enormous and angry on the other side of the arena wall. The Horntail was waiting. Harry walked out. The arena was a bowl of rough stone, natural rock shaped and expanded by magic into an amphitheater 200 yards across. Boulders studded the floor, and at the center, surrounded by a nest of real eggs and one conspicuously golden one, was the Hungarian Horntail. It was magnificent. Harry could acknowledge that even as the predator in his mind began calculating angles and distances and lines of sight. The Horntail was 40 feet of scaled muscle, dark bronze and black, her tail a spiked mace that could cave in a castle wall, her wings folded tight against flanks that rose and fell with breaths like bellows. Her head swiveled toward Harry the moment he emerged, and her eyes, yellow, slit-pupiled, ancient, locked onto him with the focused malice of a creature that had been chained in a strange place and surrounded by screaming humans and wanted very badly to kill something. She roared. The sound hit Harry like a physical force, a wall of noise and heat and old magic. Dragon fire wasn't just hot, it was enchanted, carrying the residual magic of the creature's core, and the Horntail's fire was rated the most powerful of any dragon species. Jets of flame shot from her jaws and scorched the stone 30 feet to Harry's left, close enough that the heat made his skin tight. The crowd was screaming. Bagman was commentating, his magically amplified voice careening between excitement and terror, and Potter enters the arena, he's got his wand, no broom in sight, and, oh, he's just standing there, isn't he, what's his plan, what on earth? Harry took a step forward. Then another. Then another. He did not draw his wand. The crowd noise shifted from screaming to confused murmuring. Professors in the stands were on their feet. Harry could feel Dumbledore's gaze on him from the judge's table, a specific weight of attention, blue-eyed and piercing. The Horntail tracked his approach with growing agitation. She snorted flame from her nostrils, short warning blasts, and her tail swept the ground behind her in wide arcs that shattered boulders. Her wings half spread, a threat display, I am large, I am dangerous, come closer and I will end you. Harry stopped 50 feet from the dragon. Close enough that the heat of her was a constant pressure against his face. Close enough to see the individual scales, each one the size of his palm, layered like roof tiles in patterns of bronze and black. Close enough to see the intelligence in those yellow eyes, not human intelligence, nothing that could be reasoned with, but the deep cunning of an apex predator that had survived 60 million years of evolution by being very, very good at one thing. You're not the apex predator here, Harry thought, and the thought was his and not his, human words wrapped around an instinct that predated language. He let go. The transformation was the fastest he'd ever managed. One moment he was Harry Potter, 14 years old, undersized, wearing black robes and round glasses. The next moment, the boy was gone, and in his place was the king of serpents. He exploded outward. That was the only word for it. His body erupted in every direction, flesh becoming scale, bone becoming architecture, a frame that expanded and elongated and rose from the arena floor like a living siege tower. The glasses fell and shattered on the stone. The robes tore apart and fell away like confetti. His skin darkened to emerald and his eyes sealed shut and his jaws opened wider than a doorway and his body coiled and kept coiling until 60 feet of basilisk filled the arena floor. He reared up. 30 feet of his length went vertical, his hooded head swaying above the arena like a cobra the size of a building, and the crowd went silent. Not quiet. Not hushed. Silent. The absolute, airless silence of thousands of people who have simultaneously encountered something their brains cannot process. The kind of silence that exists in the gap between the lightning and the thunder, when the world holds its breath. Bagman's commentary died mid-syllable. Someone screamed. A single, high-pitched sound that cracked the silence like a stone through glass, and then the noise came rushing in, not cheering, not this time, but a wave of shouting and crying and the clatter of people standing and the percussion of wands being drawn. In the judge's stand, Dumbledore was on his feet. His hand was raised, not for his wand, but toward the crowd, a staying gesture, wait. His face was unreadable. McGonagall had gone white. Literally white, all the blood had drained from her face and she stood behind the judge's table gripping the railing with both hands, staring at the arena floor with an expression that cycled through shock, recognition, horror, and something that might have been awe in such rapid succession that no single emotion had time to settle. Snape hadn't moved. He stood motionless in the faculty section, his dark eyes fixed on the basilisk with an expression of absolute, crystalline comprehension. Of all the people in the stadium, Severus Snape looked the least surprised. He looked, if anything, like a man who had just had a long-standing suspicion confirmed. Hermione was on her feet in the student section, both hands pressed over her mouth. She wasn't screaming. She was shaking. Neville had fainted. Ginny Weasley, who had more reason than most to react poorly to the appearance of a basilisk, was staring at the arena with wide, unblinking eyes and an expression that could have been terror or could have been something else entirely. Ron was standing. Just standing, forgotten fork in one hand, his face a war between disbelief and something that looked almost like understanding. That's why, his expression said. That's why he wasn't worried. That's why he's been disappearing all year. That's why, in the arena, the Hungarian Horntail was reassessing. Dragons were not stupid. They were not sophisticated, but they were not stupid. The Horntail had spent the last several hours dealing with threats she understood, small, noisy, bipedal things that threw light and fire from sticks. She had dealt with them the way she dealt with most threats, with superior size, superior firepower, and 60 million years of apex predator confidence. The thing in front of her now was different. The basilisk was nearly as long as she was, but built along different principles, sinuous where she was solid, flexible where she was armored. It moved with a fluid, unhurried grace that dragons didn't possess. And it was radiating something that the Horntail's hindbrain recognized with a clarity that bypassed all conscious thought, something that settled into her ancient, reptilian awareness like a stone into water. Predator. Superior predator. Superior predator. The Horntail's wings spread fully. Not a threat display, an escape attempt. She wanted to fly. The chains on her legs went taut, the spikes driven into the rock holding her in place, and she screamed, a sound very different from her earlier roars, higher, more desperate. The basilisk swayed. That great hooded head moved with hypnotic smoothness, tracking the dragon the way a cobra tracks a mouse, and the arena seemed to shrink around the two of them until nothing else existed. Harry, inside the serpent, held himself with iron control. The predator instinct was screaming, threat, large, fire-capable, eliminate. The human mind was calculating, eyes closed, not yet, not until the angle is right, she needs to look at me, needs to meet my gaze, one clean moment is all I need, the Horntail breathed fire. A column of white-hot dragonfire 40 feet long and 10 feet wide hit the basilisk head-on. The crowd screamed. The heat was staggering, turning the air into something you could chew, and the flames washed over the basilisk's scales with a roar that sounded like the end of the world, and did nothing. The scales held. Basilisk hide was the most magically resistant organic material in existence. Dragonfire, for all its power, was still fire, still elemental, still natural, and the basilisk had been designed by 1,000 years of magical breeding, or something older, something that predated breeding programs and classification systems, to be immune to exactly this kind of assault. The flames died. Smoke curled from the basilisk's scales. The stone beneath its coils was glowing red. The Horntail stared at the unmarked serpent with something that looked very much like fear. Harry opened his eyes. Gold. Not yellow, not amber, not any warm shade. The gold of molten metal, the gold of a killing curse, the gold of something that had been refined and purified until only the lethal essence remained. The Horntail met his gaze. It was instantaneous. There was no spell, no incantation, no visible beam of light. The basilisk's eyes met the dragon's eyes, and a connection was made in the space between one heartbeat and the next, a connection that bypassed scale and muscle and bone and found the spark of life underneath and extinguished it. The Hungarian Horntail died standing up. Her legs locked. Her wings froze mid-spread. Her jaws were open, a last breath of fire forming in her throat that never emerged. The light went out of her yellow eyes like a candle being snuffed, and for one impossible moment she stood perfectly, terribly still, 40 feet of dragon, frozen in a posture of defiance, and then gravity remembered she existed. She fell. The impact shook the arena. The ground cracked beneath her weight. Dust and debris erupted outward, and the nest scattered, real eggs rolling across the stone. They would be collected later by the handlers, who would find them unharmed. The golden egg bounced twice and came to rest against a boulder 20 feet from Harry's coils. Silence. A silence even deeper than before. A silence that wasn't just absence of sound but presence of shock, a positive force that pressed down on the arena like a physical weight. Harry closed his eyes. Breathed. Felt the predator instinct surge, kill confirmed, territory secure, dominance established, and let it pass through him like wine through an open window, acknowledged and released. The transformation back was deliberate. He shrank, reorganized, solidified. It took about 15 seconds, which was slower than usual. The basilisk didn't want to leave, not with the arena smelling of victory and smoke and death. But Harry was Harry, and the serpent was part of him but not all of him, and he stood on 2 feet on the scarred arena floor, 14 years old and naked. He looked down at himself, sighed, and pulled his wand from the pile of torn robes at his feet. A quick spell and he was dressed, not well, the conjured robes were basic and slightly too large, but it covered the essentials. He walked to the golden egg. Picked it up. It was heavy and warm in his hands, and the gold of its surface caught the light in a way that reminded him of his own eyes in serpent form. He walked back toward the tent. Behind him, the Hungarian Horntail lay dead on the arena floor, 40 feet of dragon killed by a 14-year-old boy's stare. The silence broke. It didn't break into cheering. Not at first. It broke into chaos, screaming, shouting, people standing and pointing, the dragon handler sprinting into the arena, too late, far too late, professors on their feet, the judges' table in uproar. Bagman was trying to commentate but his voice kept cracking. Karkaroff was on his feet with his wand drawn, his face the color of old bone. Madame Maxime had one hand on Dumbledore's arm and was speaking urgently in French. Crouch Sr. was rigid, his expression completely blank in the way that extreme shock sometimes presents. In the faculty section, a man who looked like Mad-Eye Moody watched the arena with both eyes, magical and real, and beneath the scarred face of the old Auror, Bartemius Crouch Jr. allowed himself a thin, private smile. Well, he thought. The Dark Lord will want to know about this. Harry entered the tent. Set the golden egg on the table. Sat down in the nearest chair. Breathed. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the adrenaline drop, the sudden crash that always followed a transformation, the human body reasserting its limitations after occupying a form that had none. He pressed his palms flat on the table and waited for the shaking to stop. It took longer than usual. They came for him in waves. The dragon handlers first, Charlie Weasley among them, his freckled face pulled between professional horror and something that looked almost like inappropriate admiration. "What the bloody hell was that, Potter?" he asked, and Harry didn't answer because the answer was obvious and because Charlie's colleagues were already examining the Horntail and the sound of their diagnostics filled the tent with sharp, clinical crackles of magic. The medical witch next, Madame Pomfrey, who took one look at Harry and started running diagnostic spells with the efficiency of someone who had decided to be professional now and hysterical later. She found no injuries. Of course she didn't. The Horntail had never touched him. Then the officials. And this was where it got difficult. Bagman arrived first, still flushed with excitement, his boyish face lit up like a kid at Christmas. Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. In all my years, never, not once, a basilisk. An actual basilisk. The judges are going to have to, well, we don't exactly have a precedent for, Ludo, said a quiet voice from the tent entrance, and Bagman went silent. Dumbledore entered. Behind him, McGonagall. Behind McGonagall, Snape. Behind Snape, a sputtering Cornelius Fudge, whose bowler hat was askew and whose face had achieved a shade of purple that would have been impressive on a plum. Harry stood. The silence in the tent was different from the silence in the arena. The arena's silence had been shock. This silence was assessment. Dumbledore's blue eyes met Harry's green ones, and in that gaze Harry felt the weight of the old man's intelligence brought to bear on him like a searchlight. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was calm. Not the forced calm of someone trying to project serenity, but the genuine calm of a man who had seen extraordinary things in a very long life and had learned that panic was rarely useful. "How long?" "Since the summer after second year." A muscle in McGonagall's jaw twitched. Snape's expression didn't change, which was itself a kind of change, the perpetual sneer was gone, replaced by something flat and watchful. Dumbledore nodded slowly. He didn't sit down. He stood in the center of the tent with his hands clasped before him and his half-moon spectacles catching the light, and he looked at Harry with an expression that contained grief and wonder and something that might have been guilt. "The venom and the tears," he murmured. "They reached an alchemical equilibrium in your blood. Your magical core adapted. An animagus form emerged to contain the new synthesis." He paused. "I should have seen it. The signs must have been there for months before the transformation manifested." "They were," Harry said. "I handled it." "You handled," Fudge exploded. He'd been building pressure like a kettle, and Dumbledore's measured tone had apparently been the final degree. "He handled it. Dumbledore, that boy just turned into a class XXXXX magical creature in front of 2,000 witnesses and killed a fully grown dragon with his eyes. The legal implications alone, the statute of secrecy, the beast division, Harry is a wizard, Cornelius," Dumbledore said, still looking at Harry. "An animagus transformation is a recognized magical discipline, not a creature classification. The form he takes does not change his legal status any more than Minerva's tabby cat form changes hers. A tabby cat doesn't kill things by looking at them." "An astute observation," Snape said quietly, and everyone looked at him. He was standing slightly apart from the group, arms crossed, dark eyes fixed on Harry with that same flat assessment. "The question is not what Potter is. The question is how a 14-year-old boy achieved an animagus transformation, one of the most difficult magical disciplines in existence, without any formal training, without registering with the ministry, and without anyone at this school noticing." He paused. "Including me." Harry met Snape's gaze and held it. The potion's master didn't flinch, which Harry noted and reluctantly respected. Most people had trouble meeting his eyes now, even in human form. Some instinct warned them that the thing behind those green irises was not entirely what it appeared. Snape, apparently, didn't care. "I taught myself," Harry said. "In the Chamber of Secrets. I've been training for over a year." "The Chamber of," Fudge sputtered. "You've been, in the, how did you even," he turned to Dumbledore. "Did you know about this?" "I did not," Dumbledore said, and the quiet grief in his voice was unmistakable. He was not angry at Harry. He was angry at himself, for not seeing, for not checking, for assuming that a 12-year-old boy who had survived basilisk venom and phoenix tears would come out of the experience unchanged. However, Dumbledore continued, "What is done is done. Harry has demonstrated remarkable control of an extraordinarily dangerous ability." "The dragon is dead," McGonagall said. Her voice was strained. "Albus, that dragon is dead. Killed by a student's gaze. The handlers confirmed it. Total cardiac arrest, instantaneous." She looked at Harry, and in her eyes he saw the thing he'd been dreading, the recalculation. She was looking at him and adjusting her mental model of who he was, and the new model frightened her. "Mr. Potter." "Harry. Can you control it?" "Yes. Consistently." "I have controlled it through over 400 transformations. I have never killed anything I didn't mean to kill. The dragon was a deliberate choice." The tent was very quiet. 400, Snape said. "You've transformed 400 times. 432, counting today." Something shifted in Snape's expression, the flat assessment deepened into something more complex. Not approval, exactly. Something closer to reluctant recalibration. Severus Snape had dedicated his life to the mastery of difficult magic, and whatever he thought of Harry Potter as a person, 432 unsupervised Animagus transformations was a feat of discipline that he couldn't dismiss. "The scoring," Bagman interjected, apparently unable to restrain himself any longer. "We still need to score the task. The judges are waiting." Fudge opened his mouth to protest, but Dumbledore cut him off with a raised hand. "We will score the task. Then we will discuss the broader implications. Cornelius, I would strongly recommend against any hasty actions regarding Harry's legal status. The public has just watched a Hogwarts champion defeat a dragon in spectacular fashion. Attempting to classify that champion as a dark creature would be, politically inadvisable." It was the most Dumbledore thing Harry had ever heard, a genuine threat wrapped in the language of friendly advice, delivered with the gentle smile of a grandfather offering candy. Fudge heard the threat. His purple faded to an unhealthy pink. He muttered something about committees and investigations and left the tent with the rigid posture of a man retreating without admitting retreat. The scoring, when it happened, was a circus. Bagman, 10. He held up the number with the enthusiasm of a man who had just witnessed the greatest sporting event of his career and didn't care about the ethical implications. Crouch Sr., 6. His face was a mask. The number was a compromise between the spectacular result and the profound illegality of everything that had produced it. Karkaroff, 4. He slashed the number through the air with a wand that trembled, and Harry, watching from the medical tent where Pomfrey was insisting on monitoring his vitals, noted the tremble and catalogued it. Karkaroff was afraid. Deeply, physically afraid. Not of Harry, of what Harry's ability meant for the broader magical world, and specifically for a Dark Lord who would hear about this by nightfall. Maxime, 7. She was troubled but fair, and the 7 reflected a Frenchwoman's appreciation for elegance. Whatever else could be said about Harry's approach, it had been efficient. Dumbledore, 9. He held up the number and met Harry's eyes across the distance, and in that gaze was a message: "We will talk. Soon. Properly. First place." Not that it mattered. Not that any of it mattered compared to what was coming. Harry sat in the medical tent and waited for Hermione. She came 20 minutes later, after the crowds had been herded away from the arena and the dragon handlers had begun the grim work of removing the Horntail's body. She came through the tent flap at speed, and Harry had approximately half a second to register her expression, tear-streaked, furious, terrified, relieved, and radiating a level of betrayal that he'd known was coming and had dreaded anyway, before she was in front of him. She didn't hug him this time. She stood 2 feet away with her arms crossed and her chin trembling and said, "A basilisk." "Yes. You're a basilisk Animagus." "Yes. Since 2nd year. The summer after, yes. And you didn't tell me." This was the one that hurt. Not the accusation, the ache underneath it. Hermione Granger, who had figured out the basilisk in the pipes, who had been petrified for weeks, who had spent the last 2 years as Harry's most constant ally, had been kept in the dark about the most important thing that had ever happened to him. "I couldn't," Harry said. "Not because I didn't trust you. Because I needed time." "Time for what?" "To learn control. If I'd told you in 3rd year, you would have told Dumbledore. And Dumbledore would have brought in experts, and the Ministry would have found out, and I'd have spent the last year in a department for the regulation and control of magical creatures holding cell instead of learning how to not kill people when I look at them." Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "That's..." She paused. "That's actually a very logical argument and I hate that you're right." Despite everything, Harry felt the ghost of a smile. "I know. You killed a dragon. With your eyes. Harry, do you understand how insane that sounds? I was there. 400 times. You transformed 400 times and I didn't notice. 432. And you didn't notice because I was very careful and because the Chamber of Secrets is extremely well hidden and because you were busy being brilliant in every class and saving my life in other ways." The anger was fading. He could see it draining from her face, replaced by the thing that always lived underneath Hermione's anger, concern. Deep, genuine, slightly overbearing concern. "Show me your eyes," she said. Harry blinked. "What?" "Your eyes. Right now. Are you," she gestured vaguely at her own face. "Is it always there? The basilisk thing?" Harry considered this honestly. "There's a clarity. A way of seeing the world. It's always there now, in the background. It's stronger when I'm stressed or angry. My eyes change color sometimes, gold, like the basilisk. I can't always control that." "Are they gold now?" He didn't know. He hadn't looked in a mirror since the task. "Are they?" Hermione stepped closer. Studied his face with the intensity she usually reserved for particularly interesting textbooks. "No," she said. "They're green. But there's..." She squinted. "A ring. Around the iris. Very faint. Almost gold. That's been there since about Transformation 200. And it's permanent?" "I think so." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, and it was the same fierce, bone-crushing, Hermione hug from before the task, and she said into his shoulder, "I'm still angry at you." "I know. And I'm going to research everything there is to know about Basilisk Animagi, and you're going to tell me everything you've learned, and we're going to make sure you're safe. That's not negotiable." "Okay. And if you ever keep something this important from me again, I will find a way to petrify you." "Fair enough." She pulled back, wiped her eyes, and took a steadying breath. "Ron's outside." Harry's stomach tightened. "How is he?" "White. Very white. He's been standing outside the tent for 10 minutes trying to decide whether to come in." Harry nodded. He looked at the tent entrance and raised his voice slightly. "You can come in, Ron." A pause. Then the flap opened and Ron Weasley entered, looking exactly as Hermione had described, white. Chalk white. The freckles stood out on his face like spots of paint on a blank canvas. He stood just inside the entrance and stared at Harry with an expression that was cycling through about 15 emotions too fast to read. "So," Ron said. "So," Harry said. "A basilisk." "Yeah. A 60-foot, kill you by looking at you, King of Serpents basilisk. That's the one." Ron was quiet. He looked at the floor, then at the tent ceiling, then at Hermione, then back at Harry. He walked over and sat down in the chair next to Harry's cot. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen," he said. "Yeah," Harry said. "We're good." Harry looked at him. Ron looked back, scared, yes. Uncertain, yes. But underneath all of it, in the bedrock of his expression, was the same thing that had been there since they were 11, loyalty. Dumb, stubborn, Weasley loyalty that didn't know when to quit. "Yeah," Harry said. "We're good." Ron nodded. He didn't say sorry. He didn't explain the weeks of silence and jealousy and coldness. He just sat there, and Harry just sat there, and Hermione stood between them looking like she was going to either cry again or start lecturing someone, and for a few minutes the three of them existed in the quiet understanding that some friendships survive things that would destroy lesser connections. Then Ron said, "Charlie's absolutely losing his mind, by the way. He keeps saying the Horntail was the most dangerous dragon in the reserve and you killed it in about 3 seconds and he doesn't know how to write that in his report." Harry almost laughed. "Tell him I'm sorry about the dragon." "Are you?" Harry considered this. The honest answer was complicated. The basilisk part of him felt nothing about the dragon's death, it had been a threat and now it wasn't, and the world was cleaner for it. The human part of him recognized that a magnificent creature had died because of a tournament he'd never wanted to enter. Both answers were true. "A bit," he said. "It didn't have to go that way. But I needed to be sure. 100% sure that it couldn't hurt anyone. Including you. Including me." Ron nodded again, slowly, and Harry saw the understanding settle into his friend's face. Harry hadn't just been competing. He'd been making a calculated decision about the safest way to eliminate a threat, and the basilisk form had been the safest option, not for Harry, but for everyone else. No stray fire, no panicked dragon breaking free, no risk to the crowd. One look, and it was over. Ron might not be the brightest wizard in the school, but he understood tactics. Madame Pomfrey shooed them out after that, insisting that Harry needed rest and observation and that the headmaster would want to speak with him in the morning. Harry lay on the medical cot and stared at the canvas ceiling and listened to the castle settle around him, the distant sounds of celebration from the Gryffindor common room filtering through the walls like music from another world. He wouldn't be sleeping tonight. He knew that. The cold clarity was too present, the predator too awake, the echo of the dragon's death too fresh in his memory. He closed his eyes and saw it again, the moment of contact, gold meeting yellow, the life going out of those ancient reptile eyes like a light switch being thrown. He'd done what he set out to do. He'd won the task. He'd survived the revelation. His friends were still his friends. And tomorrow, the whole world would know what he was. Harry lay in the dark and waited for tomorrow and didn't sleep. Outside the castle, at the edge of the forbidden forest, a woman knelt beside the body of the Hungarian Horntail. The handlers had moved the carcass from the arena using combined levitation charms, parking it at the forest's edge for examination and eventual removal. It lay on its side, wings crumpled, tail kinked, mouth frozen open in a last expression of surprised defiance. In death, it looked smaller somehow, still enormous, still fearsome, but diminished, the fire in its belly literally gone cold. The woman ran her wand along the dragon's flank, reading the diagnostic results with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. Not with dragons, with basilisk victims. The magical signature was identical, complete systemic shutdown, every cell in the body ceasing function simultaneously, life extinguished at the most fundamental level. No poison, no curse, no physical mechanism. Just the gaze. She stood. She was tall, angular, with the kind of bone structure that looked impressive rather than beautiful. Her coat was long and gray, lined with something that caught the moonlight with a scaly shimmer, shed snakeskin, treated and woven into the fabric. Her wand was unusual, slightly curved, pale wood, with a core that hummed at a frequency most wizards couldn't hear. She looked toward the castle. Hogwarts rose against the night sky, towers and turrets outlined by starlight, windows glowing with warmth and celebration. Somewhere in there, a 14-year-old boy was trying to sleep after killing the most dangerous dragon in the world with his eyes. Lysandra Voss had killed 3 Basilisk Animagi in her career. The first in 1971, a Russian wizard who had achieved the form through deliberate dark ritual and had used the killing gaze on 7 people before the Covenant tracked him down. The second in 1984, an Egyptian witch who had been bitten by a wild basilisk and survived, barely, and had spent 3 years fighting the transformation before losing herself to the predator instinct and killing her own family. The third in 1989, a 14-year-old boy in Brazil who had manifested the form spontaneously and had never hurt anyone, but whose control was slipping, whose eyes were going gold more often than not, whose voice had started hissing when he was angry. That one had been the hardest. They always started out convinced they were in control. Lysandra knelt beside the dead dragon's eye and placed her wand against the clouded surface. The diagnostic confirmed what she already knew: instant death. No suffering. No resistance. A perfect kill. "So there's another one," she said softly, to no one. She straightened, adjusted her snakeskin coat, and began walking toward the castle. Her stride was unhurried but purposeful, the walk of someone who had done this 3 times before and intended to do it right. The question, as always, was whether right meant saving the boy or stopping him. In her experience, there was rarely a difference. Chapter 2, Cold Blood. The owls started arriving before dawn. Harry was still in the medical wing, lying on his cot with his eyes open, when the first one hit the window. Not knocked, hit, like a feathered projectile, talons scrabbling against the glass with manic urgency. Then another. Then 5 more. Then a tide of them, brown and gray and tawny, battering against the infirmary windows until Madame Pomfrey stormed out of her office in her nightgown, threw open the casements, and was nearly bowled over by 73 owls flooding into the room like a feathered avalanche. They found Harry. Every single one of them found Harry, because every single one of them was carrying a letter addressed to Harry, and they piled onto his cot and his bedside table and the floor around him in a drift of rustling wings and parchment. Harry sat up slowly and picked up the nearest letter. Red envelope. Howler. He set it aside without opening it. The next one was on expensive cream parchment, sealed with the ministry crest. He set that aside too. The third was from the Daily Prophet, a request for an exclusive interview, offering generous compensation and editorial approval. Aside. The fourth was from a witch in Devon who wanted Harry to use his death eyes on her neighbor's dog, which apparently wouldn't stop barking. Harry stared at that one for a moment, then added it to the pile. He worked through the stack methodically while the owls jostled for perch space and Pomfrey swatted at them with a rolled-up copy of Practical Healing Monthly. The letters sorted roughly into categories: terrified, about 40%, adoring, about 30%, threatening, about 15%, and bizarre, the remainder, including 2 marriage proposals and 1 request to appear at a children's birthday party. The howler detonated on its own after 10 minutes of being ignored. A woman's voice, shrill, quivering, filled the infirmary. "You are an abomination, Harry Potter. A monster in a child's skin. The ministry should lock you in a cage and..." Harry pointed his wand at the howler and it burst into confetti. "Bit early for that," he said to nobody in particular. He got dressed. Pomfrey tried to stop him and he looked at her, gently, carefully, no gold in his eyes, just the quiet firmness of someone who was done being examined, and she let him go with a warning that she expected him back if he experienced any unusual symptoms. Given that his entire existence was an unusual symptom, Harry didn't think that narrowed things down much. The Great Hall was a gauntlet. He felt it the moment he walked through the doors, 2,000 eyes swiveling toward him like compass needles finding north. The noise level dropped, not to silence, not like the arena, but to a hushed, electric murmur that was somehow worse. People were watching him with the wary fascination you'd give a wild animal that had wandered into a shopping center. Familiar faces wore unfamiliar expressions. First years pressed against their housemates. A group of Ravenclaw girls whispered behind their hands. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table, sat down next to Hermione, and reached for the toast. "Morning," he said. Hermione slid the Daily Prophet across the table without comment. The headline took up half the front page, "Boy WHO lived or Beast WHO kills." Potter reveals Basilisk Animagus form, kills dragon instantly, Ministry demands investigation below it, a smaller but no less prominent headline, youngest champion dominates first task, most spectacular display in tournament history, says Bagman, and below that, Rita Skeeter's byline above a column that Harry didn't need to read to know the contents of. He could see the key phrases from where he sat: dangerous, unregistered, public safety concerns, the question every parent is asking, is my child safe? She's been busy, Harry said. She interviewed 14 people last night, Hermione said, her voice carrying the brittle precision that meant she was furious and organizing her fury into actionable categories. Students, parents, ministry officials. Not you, obviously. Not anyone who might have something reasonable to say. Obviously. Ron dropped into the seat on Harry's other side, grabbed the Prophet, scanned the headlines, and said, "Well, that's rubbish." He tore the paper in half and used one piece as a placemat for his scrambled eggs. It was such a perfectly Ron thing to do that Harry felt some of the tension in his shoulders loosen. Breakfast was uncomfortable but survivable. People stared. People whispered. A few Hufflepuffs actually got up and moved further down their table when Harry glanced in their direction. But the food was the same, and his friends were next to him, and the enchanted ceiling showed a clear November sky, and the world kept turning. He was halfway through his eggs when the staff table drew his attention. Dumbledore was absent, unusual for breakfast. McGonagall was present but distracted, her tea untouched, her eyes moving between Harry and the main doors as if she was waiting for something. Snape was eating with mechanical precision and watching Harry with an expression that Harry was learning to read, not hostile, exactly, but intensely calculating. The man was reassessing Harry the way a chess player reassesses the board after a piece reveals it can move in ways the rules don't cover. And Moody, the thing wearing Moody's face, was watching Harry with both eyes and a smile that didn't quite work. Too warm. Too encouraging. Like a spider admiring a fly that had just done something unexpected but was still, ultimately, heading toward the web. Harry catalogued that smile and filed it away. Something about Moody had been bothering him all year, the magical eye tracking him through walls, the constant encouragement, the way the old Auror seemed less interested in teaching defense and more interested in studying Harry specifically. The cold clarity told him this was significant. He just couldn't see the shape of it yet. The mail arrived properly during breakfast, the regular owl post, not the deluge of stranger letters. A copy of the Quibbler, Potter's Basilisk form, secret weapon against Rotfang conspiracy. And a hastily written note from Sirius. Harry, what? Fire call me tonight. You know the time. Padfoot P.S., your father would have been simultaneously terrified and incredibly proud. Your mother would have grounded you for a decade. I'm splitting the difference and demanding a full explanation. Harry pocketed the note and almost smiled. The first real confrontation came after breakfast. Harry was crossing the entrance hall toward the staircase when a voice, amplified, officious, carrying the particular brand of sweetness that concealed something rotten, called his name. Mr. Potter. A moment, if you please. He turned. A woman stood at the base of the marble staircase, short and toad-like, wearing a pink cardigan over ministry robes. Her smile was the widest thing about her face, and it didn't reach her eyes. Behind her stood two ministry wizards in the grey robes of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, carrying what appeared to be a stack of forms. Dolores Umbridge, the woman said, extending a hand. Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic. I've been sent to discuss your situation. Harry didn't take her hand. The cold clarity was humming now, reading the woman the way it read everything: threat assessment, power dynamics, intent. What it found was a small person with a large amount of institutional power and no compunction about using it on targets that couldn't fight back. My situation, Harry repeated. Your Animagus form. Umbridge's smile widened. It was physically impressive, like watching a frog try to swallow something too large for its mouth. The minister is terribly concerned about the safety implications. Terribly concerned. As you know, unregistered animagi are subject to, I'm aware of the laws. Then you'll understand that the ministry has certain obligations. Given the nature of your form, a class XXXXX creature, the most dangerous classification we have, certain additional measures may be necessary. She produced a form from behind her back. It was thick, formal, covered in small print. The header read, Application for Reclassification, Wizard 2 Magical Entity, Beast Division. Harry looked at the form. He looked at Umbridge. He looked at the two Beast Division wizards behind her, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. You want to classify me as a beast, Harry said. Not want, Mr. Potter. The law requires Animagi to register their forms with the Animagus Registry in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Not the Beast Division. Harry's voice was even, conversational. The kind of calm that Hermione would have recognized as dangerous if she'd been there. The Animagus Registry was established in 1612 to track wizards who can transform into animals. It does not reclassify the wizard. It classifies the form. A wizard who transforms into a cat is not reclassified as a cat. A wizard who transforms into an eagle is not transferred to the bird division. Umbridge's smile flickered. The precedents you cite apply to standard Animagus forms. A basilisk is hardly. A standard Animagus form is any form achieved through the Animagus transformation, regardless of the creature involved. Falco Essalon, the first recorded Animagus, could transform into a falcon. Cleodna could transform into a sea bird. Morgan Le Fay could transform into a bird of prey. None were reclassified. None were stripped of their rights. I studied the laws before I came down to breakfast, Madam Umbridge. I had a feeling someone would be waiting. Silence. The two Beast Division wizards exchanged a glance. One of them, a young man with a nervous Adam's apple, quietly took a step backward. Umbridge recovered. The smile returned, harder now, the sweetness curdling at the edges. Mr. Potter, the minister feels strongly, the minister feels scared. Harry met her eyes, and for just a moment, a fraction of a second, he let the gold flicker. Not the killing gaze. Not even close. Just a reminder of what lived behind those green irises. A flash of predator, there and gone. Tell the minister I'll register my form with the Animagus Registry. I'll comply with every legal requirement. But if anyone tries to classify me as a beast, strip my rights, or put me in a cage, I will fight it. Legally. Publicly. And I will win. He turned and walked up the stairs, and he didn't look back, and behind him Dolores Umbridge stood very still with a smile that had frozen on her face like a crack in porcelain. The two Beast Division wizards found excuses to be elsewhere very quickly. Umbridge remained for a long moment, watching the space where Harry had been, and then she turned on her low heel and walked toward the headmaster's office with a stride that suggested the conversation she was about to have with Dumbledore would be considerably less civil. Harry didn't hear that conversation. He didn't need to. Dumbledore was already 3 moves ahead, the old man had been since the moment the Horntail hit the ground, Harry suspected. By noon, a formal notice appeared on the ministry's internal bulletin boards: Harry James Potter had been added to the Animagus Registry. Form, Basilisk, King of Serpents. Status, legal. Classification attempts from the Beast Division had been blocked by the Wisengamot Subcommittee on Magical Persons' Rights, citing the precedents Harry had quoted almost word for word. Dumbledore's hand was all over it. Harry made a mental note to thank him, and a second mental note to ask how Dumbledore had mobilized the Wisengamot in less than 12 hours. The answer, he suspected, was that Dumbledore had started mobilizing the Wisengamot the moment Harry walked out of the arena. The old man had known this fight was coming before Harry had even transformed back. That was either reassuring or terrifying, depending on how you looked at it. The days that followed were an exercise in navigating a school that couldn't decide whether to worship him or flee from him. Gryffindor rallied. They always did. Harry was their champion, their seeker, their boy hero, and if their boy hero happened to be able to kill things with his eyes, well, Gryffindors valued courage, and you had to admit that was pretty courageous. The common room had a banner, Potter for President. Someone had crossed out President and written King of Serpents, and someone else had crossed that out and written Absolute Legend. Fred and George treated the whole thing as the greatest joke of the century. "Oi, Harry, reckon you could look at our potions homework? Kill it dead for us?" "Harry, Angelina wants to know if you can petrify Slytherin's keeper during the next match." "Just a suggestion." Hufflepuff was split. Half of them viewed Harry with nervous sympathy. He was a kid who hadn't asked for any of this, and Hufflepuffs understood what it felt like to be underestimated and then suddenly, violently overestimated. The other half gave him wide berth in the corridors, and Harry pretended not to notice. Ravenclaw was fascinated. Academically, clinically fascinated. Harry fielded 17 requests for interviews from Ravenclaw students writing research papers within the first 3 days, and Hermione, who had appointed herself his unofficial press secretary, turned down all of them with a form letter that she'd clearly enjoyed drafting. Slytherin was complicated. The basilisk was the symbol of their house. The heir of Slytherin was supposed to be one of them. And here was Harry Potter, Gryffindor, half-blood, nemesis of everything Slytherin pride represented, walking around with the most Slytherin ability imaginable. Draco Malfoy, who had spent 2 years taunting Harry about being the heir of Slytherin, suddenly found himself in the position of having been technically correct and having absolutely no idea what to do with that information. Harry caught Malfoy staring at him during potions, not with the usual theatrical sneer, but with a kind of bewildered calculation, as if he was trying to fit a round peg into a square hole using only his eyebrows. When he realized Harry had caught him looking, he turned away fast enough to give himself whiplash. Snape, meanwhile, taught potions as if nothing had happened. Same criticisms, same deductions, same cold efficiency. But twice, Harry caught the potions master watching him with that same flat assessment, and once, at the end of class, Snape held him back with a murmured, "A word, Potter." Harry stood by Snape's desk while the other students filed out. Snape waited until the door closed, then said, without preamble, "The transformation is painful." It wasn't a question. Harry considered lying and decided against it. It was. Not anymore. The mental effects. The predatory instinct. The cold clarity, as I assume you think of it. Snape's dark eyes were unblinking. "You believe you have it under control." "I do have it under control. Every Occlumens believes they have their mind under control. Most are wrong." Snape paused. "I am not offering sympathy, Potter. I am offering information. The mental discipline required to manage a basilisk's predatory consciousness is functionally identical to advanced occlumency. If your control ever wavers, and it will, eventually, under sufficient stress, you will need occlumency to maintain your identity. I suggest you learn it before circumstances force the issue." Harry stared at him. This was, without question, the most useful thing Snape had ever said to him. "Are you offering to teach me?" Snape's lip curled, but it was a reflexive sneer, the ghost of an old habit, not the real thing. "I am offering information. What you do with it is your own affair." A beat. Dumbledore has books on the subject. Ask him. He turned back to his desk. Harry took the dismissal for what it was, the closest thing to help that Snape's pride would allow, and left. On the fourth day after the first task, she found him. Harry was in the library. Not researching, thinking. He'd taken to sitting in the far corner behind the restricted section, where the shelves were tall enough to block the line of sight from the main tables, and reading the same page of the same book without absorbing a word. The book was Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, open to the entry on basilisks, and the entry was laughably incomplete. 3 paragraphs. Nothing about Animagus potential, nothing about the killing gaze's mechanism, nothing about the mental effects. A chair scraped across from him. He looked up. The woman from the forest. He recognized her immediately, though he'd never seen her before. The cold clarity provided a snapshot assessment before his conscious mind had time to catch up. Tall, angular, mid-40s, wearing a coat lined with treated snakeskin, wand visible at her hip, carrying herself with the economy of motion that he'd learned to associate with people who knew how to fight. Not a professor. Not a ministry official. Something else. She sat down without asking and placed her hands flat on the table, palms down, fingers spread. A deliberate gesture, no wand, no threat. Look at my hands. My name is Lysandra Voss, she said. Her voice was low, accented, Eastern European, maybe, or something harder to place. I represent the Covenant of Scales. You don't know what that is. No. We are an international organization dedicated to the monitoring and management of serpent magic. We've existed since before the Statute of Secrecy. Our mandate is simple: prevent basilisk-related catastrophes. She paused, studying him with gray eyes that had the flat, professional quality of a surgeon assessing an incision. You are the 4th basilisk Animagus I've encountered. The other 3 are dead. The cold clarity spiked. Harry's fingers tightened on the book, and he forced them to relax. Did you kill them? He asked. Yes. The words sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. Lysandra didn't flinch from it. She didn't justify it, didn't soften it, didn't wrap it in euphemism. She said it the way you'd report the weather, factual, unapologetic, necessary. Why? Harry asked. Because they lost control. Every single one. The first was a dark wizard who used the killing gaze on civilians for 7 months before we found him. The second was a witch, genuinely good person, genuinely strong will, who held on for 3 years before the predator instinct consumed her. She killed her husband and her 2 children in her sleep. She wasn't even aware she'd transformed. Harry felt something cold move through his chest. Not the clarity. Fear. The third, Lysandra continued, and her voice changed, became quieter, rougher, a tone that cost her something, was 14 years old. A boy in Brazil. Spontaneous manifestation, like yours. He never hurt anyone. But his control was degrading. The gold was in his eyes all the time. He'd started hissing when he was angry. His temperature was dropping, 35 degrees, 34, 33. His body was becoming the basilisk whether he chose to transform or not. She leaned forward slightly. You feel it already, she said. The stillness. The way the world slows down and everything becomes clear. Pray and not pray. That's all anything is to you now, in the quiet moments. Isn't it? Harry held her gaze. The gold flickered, he felt it, the heat behind his eyes, the predator responding to a perceived challenge. He pushed it down. No, he said. Lysandra's gray eyes didn't waver. Liar. I have control. So did they. For a while. She sat back, folding her arms. I'm not here to kill you, Mr. Potter. Not yet. I'm here to observe. To determine whether you're the exception or the rule. And if you decide I'm the rule, then I'll do what I've always done. Quickly and cleanly. You won't suffer. The library was very quiet. Somewhere in the stacks, Madame Pants was shelving books, the soft thud of leather on wood a domestic rhythm completely at odds with the conversation taking place in the corner. Harry looked at Lysandra Voss, really looked, with the cold clarity fully engaged, reading her the way the basilisk read everything. Threat level, high. Competence, extreme. Intent, genuine. She wasn't bluffing, wasn't posturing, wasn't playing political games. She believed what she was saying with the absolute conviction of someone who had buried 3 people for the same crime that Harry was committing simply by existing. She was also, he realized, sad. Not visibly. Not performatively. But underneath the professional detachment and the clinical language, there was a depth of weariness that the clarity could read like text on a page. This woman did not enjoy her work. She did it because someone had to, and because the alternative, letting Basilisk animagi roam unchecked, had historically ended in mass death. "You said you're here to observe," Harry said. "Fine. Observe. Watch me in class, watch me at meals, follow me around the castle if you want. You'll see what I see, control. Not perfect control, I'm 14, and I've been doing this for just over a year. But real control. Earned control." He stood, closed the book, and met her eyes one more time. "And for what it's worth," he said, "I'm sorry about the boy in Brazil." He left the library. Behind him, Lysandra Voss sat very still for a long time, her hands flat on the table, her expression unreadable. In her 23 years with the Covenant, no Basilisk Animagus had ever expressed sympathy for another. It was the first crack in her certainty. She was not yet ready to admit that. The black lake at dusk was the color of hammered steel, the surface barely moving, the reflected sky turning from gray to violet in the slow gradient of November evening. Harry sat on a flat rock at the water's edge with his knees drawn up and his chin on his forearms and watched the giant squid's tentacles break the surface in lazy, exploratory arcs. He came here when the castle felt too small. When the staring and the whispers accumulated like weight on his shoulders, and the cold clarity started reading every face in the corridor as a potential threat, and he needed to be somewhere large and open where nothing was looking at him. The squid didn't care what he was. The squid had been in this lake for centuries and had seen more magical nonsense than any creature had a right to, and one adolescent Basilisk Animagus barely registered on its scale of interesting events. Harry heard her coming. Not by sound, by the shift in the air, the way the cold clarity registered a new presence the way radar registers a blip. Someone approaching from the castle, moving with deliberate stride, not trying to be stealthy. Fleur Delacour stopped a few feet behind him. "Everyone says you come here," she said. "When you want to be alone. Everyone's right. Do you want me to leave?" Harry considered this. The honest answer surprised him, no. He didn't want her to leave. The cold clarity was assessing her, not threat, not prey, something else, something the predator categories didn't have a clean label for, and for once, the human mind and the serpent mind were in agreement. "Stay if you want," he said. She sat on the rock beside him. Not close, a respectful distance, a foot of space between them. She pulled her cloak tighter against the wind and looked out at the lake. "Everyone is talking about what you are," she said. "The papers, the professors, the other students. What you are, what you can do, whether you are safe." She paused. "I want to know who you are." "You already know who I am. Harry Potter. 4th year. Didn't put my name in the goblet. That is a list of facts. It is not who you are." Harry looked at her. In the fading light, the Vila allure was muted, or maybe it was always muted for him, always sliding off the cold surface of the basilisk mind like water off glass. What he saw, stripped of the allure, was a young woman with sharp features and tired eyes and a set to her jaw that spoke of constant, exhausting effort, the effort of being taken seriously when the first thing anyone noticed about you was a magical gift you hadn't asked for. "You know what it's like," he said. "Being defined by what you are instead of who you are. Something shifted in her expression. The polite composure cracked, just slightly, and underneath it he saw a flash of something raw. "Since I was 9, she said. "That is when the allure manifested. Before that, I was Fleur. After that, I was the Vila girl. The boys could not think around me. The girls aided me. My teachers could not look at me without." She made a small, disgusted gesture. "I learned to be cold. It was the only defense. If I was cold, at least they were reacting to me and not to the thing. The thing. The allure. The creature. Whatever you want to call it." She looked at him steadily. "You understand." He did. More than she knew. The basilisk mind was a kind of allure in reverse. Instead of drawing people in, it pushed them away. Instead of making people see something irresistible, it made them see something terrifying. Both were masks. Both obscured the person underneath. "What's it like?" he asked. The Vila sighed. "When it's strong." Fleur was quiet for a moment, and Harry watched her decide whether to be honest. The decision came quickly. She was someone who valued directness, he was learning, someone who despised the dance of euphemism and social performance that most people mistook for conversation. "Fire," she said. "When I am angry or frightened, there is fire in my chest. Real fire, my temperature rises, my air moves on its own, and if I lose control, flames come from my ends. My grandmother, she is full Vila, she can transform completely. A bird made of fire. Beautiful and terrible." She paused. Ave never transformed fully. I am afraid of it. Afraid you won't come back." She looked at him sharply. "Yes. Exactly that." They sat in the silence that followed, and it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have said something true and don't need to fill the space with noise. "The basilisk mind," Harry said eventually, and the words came slowly because he'd never said them to anyone, not even Hermione, "is cold. Not fire, the opposite. Everything slows down. Everything becomes very clear and very simple. I see the world in categories: threat, prey, territory. People become objects. Things to be assessed and dismissed or assessed and watched. The first time I transformed and looked at my friend through the basilisk's eyes, he stopped. Fleur waited. "I almost saw him as food," Harry said. "For about half a second. And then I was human again and I sat in the dark for an hour trying to convince myself that the half second didn't mean anything." "Did it?" "I don't know. I think it meant that the basilisk is part of me, and the part of me that's a basilisk is a predator, and predators think about prey whether they choose to act on it or not. I think the difference between me and an actual basilisk is that I choose. Every time. Every transformation. I choose to be Harry and not just the serpent." "Every time," Fleur repeated. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." She looked at him, and in the gathering dark, her blue eyes caught the last of the light and held it. "Your eyes change color," she said. "When you're feeling the serpent. Gold flickers in the green. I've been told. They're gold right now." Harry's stomach tightened. He hadn't felt the shift. It happened involuntarily sometimes, usually when he was emotional, and apparently honest conversation with a beautiful girl counted as emotional enough to trigger it. "Is that frightening?" he asked. Fleur studied him for a long moment. "No," she said. "It is, honest." Something passed between them, not magic, not allure, not the basilisk's cold assessment. Something human. Recognition. The quiet, powerful realization that another person sees you clearly, without the mask, without the filter, and does not look away. Harry's eyes faded back to green. He didn't consciously make them do it. His body simply relaxed, the cold clarity easing back to its resting state, because for the first time in months, he felt safe. "Thank you," Fleur said. For what? For being honest. Most people cannot manage it. They see the allure and they perform. You see. She paused, searching for the right word. You see me. The allure doesn't work on me, Harry admitted. I think the basilisk mind blocks it. Charm-based magic slides off. Fleur stared at him. Then she laughed, a real laugh, startled and bright, the first genuine one he'd heard from her. Mon Dieu. So the only boy in this school who sees past the allure is the one who can kill with his eyes. There is a joke in there somewhere. Probably, Harry said, and found himself smiling. Just can't find it. She smiled back, and the dusk settled around them, and the giant squid waved a lazy tentacle at the darkening sky. That night, in the office that belonged to Alastair Moody, a man who was not Alastair Moody crouched before the fire and spoke to a face that existed in the embers. The boy is a Basilisk Animagus, Barty Crouch Jr. said. The words came out flat, repertorial. He'd learned long ago that the Dark Lord preferred information delivered clean. Full transformation. The killing gaze is functional, he destroyed a Hungarian Horntail with a single look. He's been training in secret for over a year. The face in the fire was barely more than a suggestion, pale, flat, red-eyed, more snake than human. The expression didn't change, but the quality of the silence shifted, deepening into something anticipatory. Remarkable, said Lord Voldemort. His voice was a whisper that carried the weight of a shout, each syllable precise and deliberate and carrying an undercurrent of hunger that made Crouch's skin prickle. A Parselmouth who can become the king of serpents. The venom and the tears. A pause. I had wondered what effect they would have. My lord. The basilisk's venom is the most magically potent substance in the natural world. Phoenix tears are the most magically potent healing agent. When they met in the boy's blood, they created a synthesis, an alchemical marriage of destruction and restoration. His magical core would have been fundamentally altered. Another pause, longer. I should have foreseen this. The diary fragment that controlled the basilisk, it was mine, an extension of my soul. When the boy killed the basilisk with the sword, the venom entered his bloodstream carrying traces of my magic. Phoenix tears saved his life but could not purge the magical contamination. The result is extraordinary. Crouch waited. He knew better than to interrupt when the Dark Lord was thinking. The plan changes, Voldemort said. Wormtail has been researching the Ophidian, the entity beneath Hogwarts that my diary's research hinted at. The original basilisk was its guardian, a living lock on a prison older than the Founders. The boy killed the guardian. The boy became the guardian. He is now the key. The key to what, my lord? To power that makes the killing curse look like a parlor trick. The face in the fire smiled, and it was the most terrible thing Crouch had ever seen, and he had seen terrible things. The resurrection ritual can be modified. Instead of merely restoring my body, we will channel the Ophidian's power through the boy's blood. His blood carries the key, the magical signature that links him to the prison. When I rise, I will rise with the Ophidian's power flowing through me. Not as a Dark Lord. As something beyond. Crouch's heart was hammering. He controlled his voice with effort. What do you need me to do? Continue as planned. Ensure the boy reaches the Triwizard Cup. But add something, encourage him to spend time in the Chamber of Secrets. The more he inhabits the space, the more his magical signature reinforces the connection to the Ophidian. Every transformation he performs in the chamber feeds energy into the prison, energy the entity uses to wake. My lord, the boy is being watched. Dumbledore, the Ministry, and there's a woman, Lysandra Voss, from the Covenant of Scales. She's monitoring him. The Covenant. A flicker of something, not concern, more like professional acknowledgement, one predator recognizing another's territory. They will be an obstacle. But they are also predictable. Their mandate is to kill Basilisk Animagi, not to protect prisons. They will focus on the boy and miss the larger threat. As they always have. The face in the fire began to fade. Do not fail me, Bartemius. Never, my lord. The embers died. Crouch sat in the dark of Moody's office, listening to the real Moody's labored breathing from the trunk in the corner, and began to plan. The golden egg sat on Harry's bedside table and screamed. He'd opened it once, alone in his dormitory, and the sound that had emerged was a banshee wail that shattered his water glass and sent Hedwig into a flapping panic. He'd closed it immediately, ears ringing, and spent the next 20 minutes staring at it. The second task was in February. He had time. But the egg was a puzzle, and puzzles bothered the cold clarity. It wanted solutions, wanted answers, wanted every variable accounted for and every threat quantified. The screaming was a clue. He just couldn't read it yet. He set it aside. There was something more pressing. Dumbledore had asked to see him. The headmaster's office was warm and cluttered, the silver instruments whirring and puffing on their spindly tables, Fawkes dozing on his perch in a drift of golden feathers. Harry sat in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk and accepted a lemon drop from the proffered bowl, because refusing would have been strange and because the normalcy of the gesture, an old man offering candy to a student, was grounding in a way he needed right now. The Yule Ball, Dumbledore said, and Harry blinked. Sir. You've heard about the Yule Ball. A tradition of the Triwizard Tournament. A formal dance on Christmas evening. Champions are expected to attend with a partner and to open the dancing. Yes. I'd heard something about it. I mention it because your social life is about to become considerably more complicated, Harry. The Basilisk revelation has made you the most talked about person in magical Britain, and the ball will be the first major social event since the first task. Every eye will be on you. The ministry will be watching. The press will be watching. Ms. Voss will be watching. Harry understood. The ball wasn't just a dance. It was a stage. Choose your partner carefully, Dumbledore said. Not because of politics, because you deserve to enjoy the evening with someone who sees you clearly. It was, Harry reflected later, the most Dumbledore piece of advice Dumbledore had ever given. Profound on 3 levels simultaneously and absolutely no help with the practical question of actually asking someone. He asked Fleur the next day. She was leaving the Great Hall after lunch, flanked by 2 Beauxbatons girls who were either friends or bodyguards. Harry intercepted her in the entrance hall with the directness that the cold clarity demanded, no stammering, no build-up, just the question. Would you come to the ball with me? Fleur stopped. The 2 Beauxbatons girls stopped behind her, radiating indignation. Several passing Hogwarts students also stopped, because the spectacle of Harry Potter talking to Fleur Delacour was apparently too compelling to walk past. Fleur looked at him. That searching look, the one that stripped away pretense and examined what was underneath. Why? She asked. Because you're the only person in this castle who doesn't look at me and see either a hero or a monster. And because I'd rather spend the evening with someone who sees me clearly than someone who sees what they want to see. The entrance hall was very quiet. One of the Beauxbatons girls muttered something in French that sounded scandalized. The other one was smiling. Fleur tilted her head. The smallest smile, not the performative warmth she deployed like armor, but something genuine, a private expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Dacard, she said. Yes. She walked away. The Beauxbatons girls followed, one of them casting a glance over her shoulder at Harry that was either impressed or appalled. In the corridor behind him, Ron's voice said, very quietly, Mate. You just asked Fleur Delacour to the ball and she said yes. Harry turned. Ron was standing against the wall with a textbook in his arms, looking like he'd been hit with a bludger. I did, yeah. How? I asked. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head, and walked away muttering something about Basilisk confidence being absolutely bloody unfair. The Yule Ball arrived like a siege. The castle transformed, ice sculptures in the corridors, fairy lights in every tree, snow that fell from the ceiling of the great hall in fat, sparkling flakes that vanished before they touched the ground. The suits of armor had been enchanted to sing carols, though their grasp of pitch was theoretical at best. Students who hadn't thought about their appearance in 4 years were suddenly obsessed with hair and robes and whether their shoes were shiny enough. Harry stood in front of the mirror in the fourth-year boys' dormitory and regarded himself with the cold clarity that was both his greatest asset and the thing he most wished he could switch off. He looked good, actually. The dress robes Sirius had sent by Owl were simple and well-cut, black, with a dark green lining that was either a thoughtful color choice or an extremely pointed joke about Slytherin. His hair was doing the thing it always did, but the robes were sharp enough to make it look intentional rather than neglected. His eyes were green. Completely green. He was monitoring them. "Ready?" Ron asked, appearing in the doorway in robes that were, Harry searched for a kind word, vintage. Very vintage. Antique, even. "Ready. I look like my great-aunt Tessie." "You look fine." "That is an incredibly charitable lie and I appreciate it." They went down together. Ron had asked Padma Patil, who was waiting in the entrance hall with her sister and an expression of polite tolerance. Hermione was nowhere to be seen, which wasn't unusual. She'd been secretive about her ball preparations, and Harry suspected she was planning something. Fleur was waiting at the base of the marble staircase. She was wearing silver. The dress was simple, elegant, clean-lined, without the fuss that some of the other girls had gone for, and it caught the fairy light and held it the way the black lake held the sky, reflectively, multiplicatively, turning borrowed radiance into something that seemed to come from within. Her hair was up, a few strands framing her face. She wore no jewelry. She didn't need any. Harry walked toward her and was aware, in a distant way, of the reaction in the entrance hall, the turning heads, the dropped jaws, the sudden hush that fell over nearby conversations. Two of the most dangerous people in the castle, walking toward each other in formal wear. It would have been funny if it hadn't been terrifying. "You look beautiful," Harry said, because it was true, and the cold clarity valued truth above all else. "And you look like someone who is not afraid," Fleur said. She took his arm. Her hand was warm through the fabric. "That is more attractive than you know." They entered the Great Hall together, and the Great Hall noticed. The decorations were spectacular, the walls were silver, the ceiling was a canopy of stars, the tables were draped in white and arranged around a central dance floor that gleamed like polished ice. 1,000 candles floated overhead. The Weird Sisters were setting up on a stage at the far end, and the air smelled of pine and cinnamon and anticipation. But none of it, not the decorations, not the music, not the food, drew as much attention as Harry and Fleur walking through the doors arm in arm. The murmur that followed them was a physical thing, a wave of sound that rolled outward from the entrance like a ripple in a pond. Harry felt every eye in the room, professors, students, ministry officials. Fudge was there, in a corner, with a glass of something that was probably not his first, foreign dignitaries, Skeeter, lurking near the refreshments with a quick quotes quill that was already scratching furiously. And Lysandra, standing against the far wall in a dark dress that might have been elegant if it hadn't been so clearly chosen for ease of movement. She watched Harry cross the room with the patient attention of someone cataloging data. The champions opened the dancing. Cedric with Cho Chang. Crumb with, Harry blinked, Hermione, who looked extraordinary in periwinkle blue and was smiling in a way that transformed her entire face. Ron, in the background, looked like someone had set his robes on fire. Harry placed his hand on Fleur's waist and she placed hers on his shoulder and the music started and they danced. Harry was not a good dancer. He knew this. The cold clarity, for all its gifts, did not confer rhythm. But Fleur was an excellent dancer, and she led without appearing to lead, subtle pressure on his shoulder guiding him through the turns, and within a few bars he'd relaxed enough to stop counting steps and start moving with the music. "You are thinking too much," Fleur murmured. "I'm always thinking too much." "I know. Stop it." He tried. The music was slow, a waltz that the weird sisters were performing with uncharacteristic restraint, and the room spun gently around them, silver decorations and golden light and the faces of hundreds of people watching the boy who could kill with his eyes dance with the girl who could burn with her hands. "Fudge is watching us," Fleur said, her voice low. "I know. The woman in the dark dress, Voss, she is also watching." "I know that too. Karkaroff is drinking heavily. He keeps touching his left arm." Harry filed that away. Karkaroff's dark mark. The man was terrified, and whatever he was terrified of was getting closer. "And the man with the magical eye, Moody, he is watching you the way a Ungry man watches food." The chill that went through Harry had nothing to do with the basilisk. He looked toward the staff table and caught Moody's gaze, both eyes, magical and real, fixed on Harry with an intensity that was barely concealed behind the grizzled aura exterior. "I've noticed," Harry said. "You do not trust him." "I don't know what I think about him yet. Something's off. I can feel it." Fleur nodded. She didn't dismiss his instinct or demand evidence. She filed the information and moved on. Harry found that he liked that about her enormously. The dance ended. They moved to the edges of the room, and the evening settled into its rhythm, conversation and food and the gradually loosening formality that always happened once the punch had been circulating for a while. Fudge intercepted Harry near the refreshment table. The minister appeared at his elbow with the practiced casualness of a man who had spent 20 minutes maneuvering into position. "Harry. Enjoying the evening, I hope." "Wonderful event, wonderful. Must say, you and Miss Delacour make quite the pair." He chuckled, and the chuckle had all the warmth of a draft under a door. "I wanted to have a quiet word, just between us. About your situation." "My Animagus registration is current," Harry said. "Oh, yes, yes, all in order," Dumbledore made sure of that. "Very thorough, Dumbledore." Fudge sipped his drink. "No, I wanted to discuss something more, forward-looking. The public is concerned, Harry. Parents writing to the ministry, worried about their children sharing a school with, well, with someone who has your capabilities. Now, I'm not suggesting, you're suggesting that my presence at Hogwarts is a political problem for you." Fudge's smile stiffened. "I'm suggesting that certain accommodations might ease public anxiety. Perhaps a formal demonstration of your control, supervised by ministry officials. Perhaps certain restrictions on when and where you can transform, Minister." Harry's voice was quiet. Conversational. The voice of someone who was not raising their volume because they didn't need to. "I am a Hogwarts student. I am a legal Animagus. I have committed no crime, harmed no person, and posed no threat to anyone who hasn't tried to eat me first. If you want to restrict my rights, pass a law. Take it to the Wisengamot. And when you do, make sure to explain to the voters why you're persecuting a 14-year-old orphan who defeated a dragon in a tournament the ministry organized." Fudge's grip on his glass tightened. The smile held, but the eyes behind it were cold. "You're very confident for someone your age, Mr. Potter." "I've had to be." They looked at each other for a moment that stretched like taffy, the Minister of Magic and the boy who could kill with his eyes, standing 3 feet apart over a table of canapés while the weird sisters played a jaunty reel in the background. Then Fudge nodded, once, curtly, and walked away. Fleur appeared at Harry's side. "That was well led. He'll be back. Fudge doesn't give up, he just retreats and regroups. Then you will handle him again." She handed Harry a glass of something sparkling. "Drink. You deserve at least one normal moment tonight." They found their normal moment on the dance floor, during a slower number that the weird sisters played with surprising tenderness. The great hall dimmed, the floating candles lowering, the fairy lights softening, and Harry and Fleur swayed together in the half-light, and for a few minutes, everything else fell away. "Can I ask you something?" Harry said. "You will anyway. Why did you enter the tournament?" You knew it was dangerous. You didn't need the fame or the money. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Beaux batons chose me, she said. The goblet chose me. And I thought, foolishly, perhaps, that if I could prove myself in a contest that had nothing to do with beauty or allure, if I could win on skill and courage alone, then maybe the world would see Fleur instead of the Villa girl. Has it worked? What do you think? I nearly burned to death fighting a dragon, and the prophet described my task performance by noting that my skirt caught fire and I had lovely legs. Harry made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a growl. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Anger is more useful than pity. He looked at her, and the gold flickered, he felt it, the warmth behind his eyes, the predator stirring. But it wasn't predatory this time. It was protective. A different kind of warmth entirely. They're gold right now, Fleur said softly. Yeah. Is that, I told you before. It is, honest. She held his gaze, and the blue of her eyes was steady and clear, and the warmth of her hand on his shoulder was the most human thing he'd felt in months. You are not a monster, Harry. I know monsters. I know what they look like from the inside. You are a boy who carries something dangerous and chooses, every day, not to let it consume him. That is not monstrous. That is brave. Harry didn't have words for what he felt. The cold clarity, for once, had nothing to offer, no categories, no assessments, no clean labels for the thing that was happening in his chest. He settled for honesty. Thank you, he said. They danced. The attack came 2 hours later. The ball was winding down. Students drifted toward their dormitories in pairs and groups, flushed and giddy. The corridors were dark, the fairy lights fading, the suits of armor humming the last bars of "Oh Come, All Ye Faithful" in drowsy, clanking tones. Harry and Fleur were walking the grounds, not toward the castle, but away from it, along the lakeshore path, because neither of them wanted the evening to end yet. The air was cold and sharp. Fresh snow crunched under their shoes. The black lake was a mirror of black glass, and above it the stars were fierce and bright in the way they only got in Scottish winters. When I go back to France after the tournament, Fleur said, I am going to miss this. The cold. The castle. It is so old, air. You can feel the magic in the stones. Will you come back? She glanced at him. To Britain? To visit. The smallest smile. That depends on whether there is a reason to visit. Harry opened his mouth to respond and the cold clarity screamed. It was not a metaphor. The predator instinct that lived in the back of his mind, the constant low hum of threat assessment that he'd spent 14 months learning to manage, spiked so violently that his vision went white for a fraction of a second. 3 figures. 10 o'clock, behind the boathouse, 30 yards away, moving fast, and the magic rolling off them was wrong, dark, focused, professional. Harry seized Fleur's arm and pulled her behind a tree as the first curse split the air where her head had been. The curse was green-black, not the killing curse but something in its family, a suffocation hex, Harry's clarity told him, designed to collapse the lungs. It hit the tree behind them and the bark peeled back like burned paper. Down! Harry shouted, and Fleur dropped without hesitation, rolling behind the tree's roots. Her wand was already in her hand. That impressed him, most people froze for at least a second when ambushed. Fleur was firing a stunning spell over the roots before Harry had finished drawing his own wand. 3 attackers. Dark robes, hoods pulled low, faces obscured. Not Death Eaters, the robes were wrong, too modern, too tactical. They moved like professionals, spacing themselves in a triangle formation, covering angles, advancing in short bursts between cover. The lead attacker threw something, not a spell, a physical object, small and metallic. It hit the ground between Harry and Fleur and expanded with a snap into a circular device trailing runic chains that glowed a sickly yellow. Suppression collar. The clarity identified it instantly, anti-Animagus technology, designed to block transformation. The chains reached for Harry like living things, and he felt his basilisk nature recoil, the cold clarity dimming as the device's magic interfered with the connection between his human and serpent forms. He kicked the device away. It skidded across the snow, chains trailing, and the pressure eased, but the message was clear. They knew what he was. They'd come prepared. Harry. Fleur's voice, sharp and commanding. She was on her feet now, wand blazing, trading spells with the two flanking attackers. Her Beauxbatons training was evident, her wand work was precise and elegant, each spell placed with surgical accuracy. A shield charm deflected a body bind, a reductor curse shattered the boulder one attacker was hiding behind, and when the second attacker tried to close distance, she shifted her grip on her wand and her left hand came up and fire erupted from her palm. Vila fire. Not the orange of a heating charm or the yellow of an incendio. Blue-white, nuclear, carrying the focused fury of a part-human creature defending herself. The fire hit the ground between her and the attacker and bloomed into a wall of flame that forced him back, screaming. Harry focused on the lead attacker, the one who'd thrown the suppression collar. This one was better than the others, faster, more disciplined. The spells came in combinations, stunning, bone-breaking, entral-expelling, designed to overwhelm rather than to land any single hit. Harry deflected the first three, sidestepped the fourth, and countered with a disarming charm that the attacker dodged and a blasting curse that cratered the earth where the attacker had been standing. Harry couldn't transform. The suppression collar was still active, its radius extending even from where it lay in the snow, and his basilisk nature was a door that had been jammed shut. He was fighting as a wizard, purely a wizard, and the experience was both liberating and terrifying, liberating because it proved he wasn't dependent on the serpent, terrifying because without the serpent he was a 14-year-old boy fighting trained killers in the dark. But he was also a 14-year-old boy who had spent a year training alone in the Chamber of Secrets, who had fought a mountain troll and a basilisk and 100 dementors, who had been hardened by trials that would have broken adults. The lead attacker fired a curse Harry didn't recognize, purple, spiraling, fast. Harry transfigured a rock into a marble shield, caught the curse, and whipped the shield forward with a banishing charm. It caught the attacker in the chest and knocked him backward into a tree. Harry followed up with a binding curse, ropes erupted from his wand, thick and fast, wrapping the attacker from shoulders to ankles. First one down. Fleur had the second attacker pinned behind a rapidly melting boulder, her Vila fire carving the stone like butter. The attacker was panicking, throwing wild curses that went high and wide. Fleur stopped the fire, aimed her wand with careful precision, and said, "Stupefy," with the calm clarity of someone finishing a sentence. The red bolt hit the attacker between the eyes and he dropped. Second one down. The third attacker saw the odds shift and did something Harry didn't expect. Instead of running, he stopped. Stood in the open. Raised his hands. For a moment, Harry thought he was surrendering. Then the attacker spoke a word, a single word, in a language Harry didn't recognize but the cold clarity responded to with a jolt of alarm, and his body began to glow. Serpentine runes crawled across his exposed skin, luminous and golden, and the magic that poured off him was familiar in a way that made Harry's blood run cold. Serpent magic. The same frequency as the cold clarity, the same harmonic as the basilisk's nature, the same ancient resonance that Harry felt in the Chamber of Secrets. For the Covenant, the attacker said, and triggered the curse. It was a suicide spell. Harry recognized the intent, if not the mechanics, in the half-second before the man detonated. He grabbed Fleur, hauled her behind the largest tree in reach, and threw every shielding spell he knew into the air between them and the explosion. The blast was serpentine, a wave of golden light that twisted and spiraled outward in patterns that looked like scales, carrying a concussive force that shattered every window in the boathouse and knocked Harry and Fleur off their feet. Harry hit the ground, rolled, felt Fleur land beside him, and covered her with his body as debris rained down. Silence. Then the sound of snow settling, and glass tinkling, and Fleur's rapid breathing beneath him. Are you hurt? Harry said. No. You. No. He rolled off her. They lay side by side in the snow, staring at the sky, and the aftermath of the explosion was a scorched circle in the ground where the third attacker had been. No body. No evidence. Just burned earth and a fading residue of serpent magic that made Harry's skin prickle. They knew about you, Fleur said. She sat up slowly, brushing snow from her silver dress. There was soot on her face and a tear in her sleeve and her hair had come undone. She looked furious and shaken and absolutely magnificent. The device, the suppression collar. They came prepared to fight a Basilisk Animagus. Yes. Who sent them? Harry looked at the scorched earth. The golden runes. The serpentine magic. I don't know. But I know who might. They secured the 2 surviving attackers with additional binding spells and Harry sent a Patronus to the castle. The stag burst from his wand, silver and blazing, and galloped up the hill toward Hogwarts. Within minutes, the grounds were swarming with professors. McGonagall arrived first, wand drawn, hair down, wearing a tartan dressing gown over her nightclothes and looking like she was fully prepared to murder someone. Dumbledore followed, still in his ball robes, his expression grave. Snape. Flitwick. Hagrid, who took one look at the scorched earth and the bound attackers and said, "Blimey, what happened here?" The explanations were brief. Harry kept them factual: 3 attackers, professional, equipped with anti-Animagus technology, 1 suicide detonation. He didn't speculate about who sent them. He didn't need to. Lysandra Voss arrived 20 minutes later, striding out of the darkness in her snakeskin coat, and the expression on her face when she saw the scorched circle was the first genuine emotion Harry had seen from her. She knelt at the edge of the burn zone. Ran diagnostic spells. The results scrolled in the air above her wand: magical signatures, runic patterns, energy frequencies. Covenant resources, she said. Her voice was flat. The suicide spell is from our playbook. The suppression collar is our design. The serpentine runes on the detonation, Covenant origin. Your people tried to kill him. McGonagall's voice could have cut glass. Not on my orders. Lysandra stood. She looked at Harry, and for the first time, her grey eyes held something other than professional assessment. Someone within the Covenant acted without authorization. There are factions, members who believe that any Basilisk Animagus should be eliminated immediately, regardless of evaluation outcomes. Charming organization you work for, Harry said. Lysandra didn't flinch. I didn't say I agreed with them. I said they exist. She met Dumbledore's gaze. Headmaster, this won't be the last attempt. The Covenant is fractured on this issue. My evaluation of Mr. Potter is ongoing, and as long as it's ongoing, some of my colleagues will view him as a threat that I'm failing to address. Then perhaps, Dumbledore said quietly, your evaluation should reach a conclusion sooner rather than later. Lysandra's jaw tightened. She looked at Harry, really looked, the way she had in the library, the surgeon's assessment, the killer's calculation, and Harry looked back. Gold flickered in his eyes. Not because he was angry. Because the basilisk nature recognized her for what she was, the most dangerous person in the immediate vicinity. Not because of her magic or her weapons, but because she was the only person here who had killed his kind before and was genuinely, philosophically uncertain about whether she should do it again. I saw the fight, Lysandra said. From the castle. I was coming to intervene when the third attacker detonated. And? Harry said. And you fought as a wizard. The suppression collar blocked your transformation, and instead of panicking, you adapted. You fought competently, creatively, and at no point did you attempt to circumvent the collar or use your basilisk nature through alternative means. You protected Miss Delacour. You subdued 2 attackers non-lethally. You did everything a well-trained Auror would have done. She paused. The 3 I killed before you would have tried to force the transformation. Would have raged against the collar, lost control, killed everything in the radius. You didn't. No. No, she echoed. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth, not yet, but a loosening of the rigid certainty she'd carried since arriving at Hogwarts. I haven't finished my evaluation. But I've made a note. She turned and walked back toward the castle, snakeskin coat flaring in the wind. Dumbledore watched her go with an expression that was simultaneously approving and deeply, personally worried. He turned to Harry. You should rest. I need to check something first. The chamber? Harry looked at him, surprised. Dumbledore's blue eyes were grave behind the half-moon spectacles, and the usual twinkle was absent, replaced by something heavier, something that Harry recognized from the mirror, the weight of knowledge you wish you didn't have. Yes, Harry said. I need to check the chamber. Then I'll come with you. Fleur touched Harry's arm. Her hand was warm, warmer than normal, the Vila fire still elevated from the fight. I will wait, she said. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of position. I will be here when you come back. Harry nodded. He and Dumbledore walked back toward the castle, and neither of them spoke, and the silence between them was the silence of two people who are about to confront something neither wants to face. The entrance to the chamber hadn't changed. The same bathroom, the same sink, the same hiss of Parseltongue that made the pipes groan and the walls shudder. Harry spoke the word and the sink descended and the pipe opened, a dark throat leading into the castle's hidden depths. He went first. Dumbledore followed, his descent slowed by a cushioning charm, his wand lit and casting long shadows across the tunnel's curved walls. The old man moved well for his age. Harry had never thought about Dumbledore's physicality before, but here, in the narrow tunnel, the headmaster moved with a careful grace that suggested more combat experience than his grandfatherly persona typically advertised. The bone-littered antechamber. The sealed door with the serpent lock. Harry hissed it open and they entered the chamber proper. Something was wrong. Harry felt it before he saw it, a change in the air, a warmth where there should have been cold. The Chamber of Secrets had always been cool, the deep stone maintaining a constant temperature regardless of the season, and the cool had been part of its appeal, part of what made it feel like the Basilisk's domain. But now the air was warm. Not hot, warm, like bathwater, like a room where someone had been running a fire all night. And the smell. The chamber's usual smell, wet stone, age, mineral, was underlaid with something new. Something organic and ancient, like the smell of scales but magnified 1,000-fold. Harry's wand lit the nearest serpent pillar, and he stopped. Cracks. Running through the stone in jagged lines, following the carved scales of the pillar as if the cracks were tracing the artwork. The stone had split, not recently, not with the sudden violence of an earthquake, but slowly, incrementally, as if something had been expanding beneath the surface for months. When were you last here? Dumbledore asked. 2 nights ago. These cracks weren't here. They moved deeper into the chamber. Past the first pair of pillars, cracked. Past the second pair, worse, with actual gaps in the stone through which a faint golden light seeped. Past the third pair, where the cracks were wide enough to fit a finger into and the golden light was clearly visible, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic cadence that matched Harry's heartbeat. They reached the end of the chamber. Slytherin's great stone face loomed above them, bearded and stern. Below it, the platform where the basilisk had once rested, the stone where Ginny had lain, the spot where Tom Riddle had stood. And beyond that, in the wall behind the statue, where Harry had never looked closely because there had never been a reason to, a door. Not a physical door. A seal. Carved into the foundation stone of the chamber, carved, Harry realized with the cold clarity's pattern recognition, into the foundation stone of Hogwarts itself, were runes. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Serpentine script, flowing and interconnected, covering the wall from floor to ceiling in a tapestry of magical language that made the Parseltongue in Harry's mind sing with recognition. The runes were glowing. Faintly. The golden light that seeped through the cracked pillars originated here, from these runes, from this wall, from whatever lay behind it. The glow pulsed. Slow, deep, organic. Like breathing. Like a heartbeat. Harry's own heart was hammering. The cold clarity was at maximum intensity, every sense sharpened, every instinct screaming information at him, ancient, powerful, alive, kin. He shut the instinct down with an effort that left him slightly breathless. "What is that?" he asked. Dumbledore stood beside him, and for the second time in Harry's memory, the headmaster looked afraid. Not panicked. Not cowering. But afraid in the way that very old, very wise people are afraid, with full comprehension of the scope of the danger, undiluted by the comforting fog of ignorance. "I had hoped," Dumbledore said slowly, "that this day would not come in my lifetime." He raised his wand and cast a diagnostic charm, not the simple spells Harry had learned, but something dense and multilayered, a web of magic that settled over the rune-covered wall like a net and shimmered as it read the energies beneath. The results made Dumbledore close his eyes. "Harry," he said. "I need to tell you about the Ophidian." They sat on the cold stone floor of the Chamber of Secrets, the most powerful wizard in Britain and a 14-year-old boy who could kill with his eyes, and Dumbledore told him the truth. When the founders built Hogwarts, Dumbledore began, they chose this location for specific reasons. The ley lines are powerful here, 7 major lines converging beneath the castle, creating a nexus of magical energy unmatched anywhere in Europe. But the ley lines were not the only thing they found. He paused, choosing words. Deep beneath the rock, deeper than the chamber, deeper than the dungeons, deeper than the roots of the oldest trees in the forest, they discovered something. An entity. A consciousness that had existed in the magical substrate of the earth since before recorded history. The founders called it the Ophidian. "A serpent," Harry said. The Parseltongue in his mind supplied the translation automatically, Ophidian. Of or relating to serpents. More than a serpent. A source. The Ophidian is, or was, or may be again, one of the primordial forces from which serpent magic derives. Parseltongue, Basilisk biology, Vela fire, Dragon fury, all of these are branches of a magical tradition that stretches back to the beginning of magic itself. The Ophidian is the root. And it's under the school. It has been under the school for 1,000 years, yes. The founders discovered it during the early construction. It was not active, not awake, not conscious in the way we understand consciousness. But it was present, and its presence influenced the magic around it. Hogwarts is the most powerfully magical location in Britain in part because the Ophidian's sleeping body feeds energy into the ley line nexus. Slytherin knew. Slytherin knew. He was the only Parselmouth among the founders, the only one who could communicate with serpent magic directly. He realized that the Ophidian, while dormant, could potentially be awakened, and that if it awakened, the consequences would be catastrophic. Not because the Ophidian is malevolent. Because its very consciousness warps magic and reality around it. An awakened Ophidian would be like a star igniting at the Earth's core, the sheer output of magical energy would destabilize everything within hundreds of miles. So Slytherin built the chamber. He built the chamber as a housing for a guardian. The Basilisk. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression of deep, complicated regret. The Basilisk was not just a weapon left to purge Muggleborns. That was Slytherin's stated purpose, a cover story, if you will, for the real function. The Basilisk's presence served as a magical dampener, a living lock on the Ophidian's prison. The serpent's magic was sympathetically linked to the Ophidian's, and as long as the Basilisk lived, the prison's seals held. The silence that followed was absolute. Harry looked at the glowing runes. The golden light pulsed. Slow. Steady. Alive. "I killed the Basilisk," he said. "Yes. And when I killed it, the seals started to weaken." "Yes. And when I became a Basilisk Animagus." Dumbledore met his eyes. "When you became a Basilisk Animagus, the Ophidian gained a new focal point. A living serpent mind that it could recognize, could reach toward. Your transformations in the chamber, every one of them, have been feeding energy into the prison. Not consciously. Not intentionally. But the sympathetic link works both ways. You've been strengthening the Ophidian even as you've been strengthening yourself. Harry stared at the wall. The runes pulsed. And now that Dumbledore had said it, he could feel it, had always felt it, he realized, that warmth in the chamber that he'd attributed to the stones, that sense of presence at the edge of his Parseltongue, that feeling of being recognized when he was in serpent form. The sleeper stirs. The key has turned. The eye of the serpent opens. The words of the runes. He could read them now, clear as English, the Parseltongue in his mind translating automatically. What do we do? Harry asked. And for the first time in Harry's experience, Albus Dumbledore did not have an answer ready. They stared at the glowing wall together, the old man and the boy, and the warmth from below continued to rise, and somewhere in the deep stone of the earth, something vast and ancient shifted in its sleep. Above them, in the castle, the Yule Ball was ending. Students drifted to their beds. The fairy lights dimmed. The enchanted snow dissolved. And in the entrance hall, Fleur Delacour sat on the marble stairs in her silver dress, waiting for a boy with golden eyes to come back from the dark. He would come back. She was certain of that, with a certainty that had nothing to do with Vila intuition and everything to do with the way he'd looked at her when they danced, as if she was the first real thing he'd seen in months. She waited. The castle settled around her, old and warm, full of sleeping children and ancient magic and 1,000 years of accumulated wonder. And beneath it all, the Ophidian dreamed. Chapter 3, What Lies Beneath the Serpents came first. Not large ones, not at first. Small grass snakes appearing in corridors where no snake had any business being. A slow worm coiled around a banister in the charms corridor. An adder basking on a windowsill in the astronomy tower, 50 feet above the nearest patch of ground, as if it had simply materialized from the stone. Professor Sprout found one in her greenhouse, a smooth snake wrapped around the stem of a venomous tentacula, apparently immune to the plant's toxins. Professor Vector found one in her office, curled inside her abacus. Filch found 7 in his quarters in a single morning and had what Mrs. Norris's expression suggested was a spectacular breakdown. Hagrid thought it was wonderful. Snakes turning up everywhere. Must be a warm winter. Nature's grand, innit? It was not a warm winter. It was January in Scotland, cold enough to crack stone, and snakes did not appear spontaneously in the upper floors of a castle in January. Everyone knew this. Nobody said it, because saying it meant acknowledging the connection to the thing that everyone was trying very hard not to think about. Harry felt it constantly now. The warmth. The presence. Not words, the Ophidian didn't think in words, as far as Harry could tell, but a pressure against the edges of his Parseltongue, the way you feel someone standing behind you in a dark room. It was strongest in the lower levels of the castle, where the stone was oldest and the distance to the rift was smallest. Walking through the dungeons felt like wading through warm water. Walking through the Chamber of Secrets felt like standing inside a pulse. He'd stopped going to the chamber. Dumbledore had advised it, and for once Harry agreed with the old man without argument. Every transformation he performed in the chamber fed energy downward, strengthening the very thing they needed to keep dormant. He practiced his transformations outside now, in the Forbidden Forest at midnight, 50 yards in and far enough from the castle that the Ophidian's influence was a whisper rather than a shout. Dobby came with him. The elf carried towels and a change of clothes and a small lantern that he held up like a lighthouse keeper guiding ships through fog. He never complained about the cold or the hour. He did, occasionally, express concern. Harry Potter is transforming more often, Dobby said one night, watching Harry coil through the frozen trees in serpent form, 60 feet of dark emerald muscle flowing between the ancient oaks with fluid, terrible grace. 3 times this week. Harry Potter used to transform once a week at most. Harry shifted back, accepted a towel, and considered the observation honestly. Dobby was right. The transformations were coming more frequently, not because Harry chose them, but because the need was building. The basilisk nature was becoming louder, more insistent, a hunger that grew between transformations the way physical hunger grew between meals. He could resist it. He always could. But the resistance was requiring more effort. "I know," he said. "I'm monitoring it." "Dobby is also monitoring it," the elf said firmly. "And Dobby thinks Harry Potter should talk to someone." "Not Dobby. Someone who understands." The someone who understood found Harry first. He was eating breakfast, eggs, toast, the mechanical routine of it, when Lysandra Voss sat down across from him at the Gryffindor table. She did this without asking, without greeting, and without apparently caring that every student within 15 feet immediately found somewhere else to look. "Your temperature has dropped," she said. Harry looked up from his eggs. "Good morning to you too. 36.2 degrees yesterday. Down from 36.8 a month ago. Normal human body temperature is 37. He set down his fork. "You've been monitoring my temperature." "I've been monitoring everything. Ambient serpent magic concentration in the castle has increased 17% since the Yule Ball. Snake manifestations in the upper levels have tripled. The portraits in the dungeons are moving on their own, not speaking, just shifting. Watching. And the Sorting Hat has been singing. The Sorting Hat always sings. Not in Parseltongue. That stopped him. I heard it last night," Lysandra continued. Her grey eyes were steady, clinical, but underneath the professional surface Harry could see something he hadn't seen before, urgency. "Midnight. I was doing rounds in the second-floor corridor. The hat was singing from inside Dumbledore's office, I could hear it through the gargoyle. The melody was recognizable. The language was not English." Harry processed this. The Sorting Hat was one of the oldest magical artifacts in Hogwarts. It had been created by the founders themselves, imbued with their combined intelligence. If the Ophidians' influence was reaching the hat. "It's spreading," he said. "It's been spreading since you killed the original basilisk. Your presence, your transformations, accelerated the timeline. But even if you stopped transforming permanently, the degradation of the seals would continue. You removed the guardian. The prison is failing." Hermione, sitting 3 seats down, had been pretending not to listen. She stopped pretending. "Is there a way to repair the seals?" Lysandra looked at her with the faint surprise of someone who had forgotten other people existed. "The Covenant has a ritual. It was designed for exactly this scenario, the loss of a basilisk guardian and the subsequent weakening of an Ophidian prison." "There are other prisons?" Harry asked. There were 3. 2 failed in antiquity. The Ophidians beneath those sites awakened and had to be subdued by combined forces, hundreds of wizards, decades of work, catastrophic casualties. The 3rd prison is here. Hogwarts. The last one. And the ritual? Lysandra's jaw tightened. The urgency in her eyes flickered into something more personal. The ritual works by severing the sympathetic link between the basilisk and the Ophidian. In this case, that means severing your link. Stripping your Animagus ability. Returning you to a purely human magical state. The table was very quiet. "That would reseal the prison?" Hermione asked. "Theoretically. The ritual removes the focal point, the living serpent mind that the Ophidian is reaching toward. Without a focus, the entity's consciousness disperses back into dormancy. The existing seals, weakened as they are, should hold for another few centuries." "Theoretically," Harry repeated. "There are risks. Your basilisk nature is fused with your magical core, the Venomanteur's synthesis isn't a separate entity sitting on top of your magic. It is your magic, fundamentally altered at the deepest level. Stripping the Animagus form means stripping the synthesis. Which means stripping a significant portion of your magical core. How significant? Lysandra paused. That pause said more than her words. The Brazilian boy, the third one. We attempted the ritual on him before the final option became necessary. It didn't strip his magic. It stripped his life. The basilisk nature was too deeply integrated. Removing it was like removing a load-bearing wall. Everything collapsed. He died. He died. And you think the same thing would happen to me? I think there is a significant chance. Your integration is even deeper than his. You've been transforming for over a year, hundreds of times. The synthesis has had time to become foundational. The ritual might work. It might leave you alive but magically diminished. Or it might kill you. Harry looked at his eggs. They were getting cold. The morning light through the great hall's windows was thin and gray, and the enchanted ceiling showed clouds moving fast across a winter sky. What's the alternative? Hermione asked. Her voice was careful, controlled, the voice she used when she was thinking very fast and didn't want her emotions to interfere. Mr. Potter could serve as the new guardian. Replace the basilisk. Bind himself to the prison, permanently. His presence in the chamber would reinforce the seals the way the original basilisk's presence did. The Ophidian would remain dormant. For how long? For as long as he lives. And stays. Stays, Harry said. As in, stays in the chamber. The sympathetic link requires proximity. You would need to spend the majority of your time in or near the chamber. You could leave for short periods, but the further you went and the longer you stayed away, the more the seals would weaken. You're describing a prison, Hermione said, and her voice had lost its careful control and found its anger. You're telling him his choices are death or a cage. I'm telling him his choices as I understand them. If he has a third option, I'd like to hear it. Harry pushed his plate away. The cold clarity was running calculations, not about the Ophidian, not about the ritual, but about Lysandra herself. Her body language. The tension in her shoulders. The way her fingers had tightened when she mentioned the Brazilian boy. She didn't want to do this. She was presenting options she hated because the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. I'll find a third option, Harry said. Lysandra's expression didn't change. The previous 3 basilisk animagi said similar things. The previous 3 weren't me. That is exactly what they said, as well. Then they were wrong and I'll be right. The difference is that I have something they didn't, time, allies, and a school full of the most accomplished wizards in Britain. I'm not solving this alone, and I'm not solving it today. The seals are weakening, but they're not broken. Dumbledore's diagnostics gave us months, not days. Months, Lysandra repeated. Months during which the Triwizard Tournament continues to pour ambient magic into the castle, ambient magic that the Ophidian feeds on. Every task, every enchantment, every spell cast by 1,000 excited wizards and witches adds energy to the system. The tournament is accelerating the timeline. Then we'd better work fast. He stood. Looked at Lysandra. Gold flickered in his eyes, and he let it, not as a threat, but as a statement. I am what I am. I will not apologize for it, and I will not submit to your ritual or your cage. You call me arrogant, he said. I call you a coward. You keep choosing the easy answer, kill the Animagus, strip the power, neutralize the threat. Clean solutions for complicated problems. But the easy answer killed a 14-year-old boy in Brazil, and it won't work here. Lysandra's gray eyes went flat. The surgeon's mask settled into place, and behind it, something burned. You think I chose easily, she said, and her voice was very quiet. You think I knelt beside that boy in Sao Paulo and made a simple decision. I held his hand while the ritual tore through him. I watched his eyes go from gold to brown to nothing. I buried him myself because his family wouldn't claim the body. I have carried that boy's name in my chest for 5 years and I will carry it until I die. Do not call me a coward because I'm trying to prevent it from happening again. The great hall was silent around them. Students at nearby tables had stopped eating. Hermione was frozen mid-reach for her pumpkin juice. Harry held Lysandra's gaze. The cold clarity read her fury and her grief and her bone-deep exhaustion, and the predator in his mind, for once, had nothing to contribute. This wasn't about threat assessment. This was about two people who were afraid of the same thing and disagreed about how to survive it. I'm sorry, Harry said. About the boy. About calling you a coward. You're not. But I won't die to make your job easier, and I won't live in a cage to make the world feel safer. I'll find another way. He left the great hall. Behind him, Lysandra Voss sat at the Gryffindor table surrounded by students who were doing their very best to be invisible, and she did not move for a long time. January bled into February. The castle grew stranger. The portraits in the lower levels began moving independently, not speaking, as Lysandra had noted, but shifting position in their frames, turning to face downward, toward the earth. Professor Binns, the ghost who taught history of magic, stopped his usual lecture about goblin rebellions mid-sentence one Tuesday afternoon and stared at the floor for 45 seconds before resuming as if nothing had happened. When asked about it later, he seemed genuinely confused. The Sorting Hat sang in Parseltongue twice more. Harry was the only person who understood the words. The old serpent sleeps beneath the stone, the new serpent walks above, between them lies a chain of bone that neither breaks nor bends from love. He wrote the words down and showed them to Dumbledore. The old man studied them with the intensity of someone reading a death sentence written in code. A chain of bone, Dumbledore murmured. The sympathetic link. The connection between your basilisk nature and the Ophidian's consciousness. The hat says it neither breaks nor bends, Harry said. That sounds like the ritual wouldn't work anyway. Or that the hat is speaking metaphorically. Prophecy and magical verse are rarely literal. Prophecy. Harry looked at him sharply. Dumbledore had the grace to look uncomfortable. The Sorting Hat is not a seer. But it was created by the founders, and it has been absorbing magical knowledge for a millennium. When it sings unprompted, particularly in a language it shouldn't know, it is worth listening to. There's something else, Harry said. In the verse. That neither breaks nor bends from love. What if it's saying the chain can be broken, just not by love? Not by gentleness or willing sacrifice. Then by what? Harry didn't have an answer. The second task was 2 weeks away. Harry hadn't forgotten the golden egg. He'd worked out the clue weeks ago, with help from Cedric, repaying the favor from the first task, and an uncomfortable hour in the prefect's bathroom listening to the egg's song underwater. Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground, an hour long you'll have to look, and to recover what we took. Mere people. The Black Lake. Something taken. An hour to get it back. The something taken part nagged at him. The cold clarity turned it over like a puzzle piece, examining edges, what we took. Something precious. Something personal. Something that Harry would dive to the bottom of a frozen lake to recover. He trained for the task in the lake itself, transforming at the water's edge in the pre-dawn dark and slipping into the water as the basilisk. The cold barely registered, the serpent form was ectothermic but magically sustained, drawing warmth from its own core rather than the environment. The water was his element as much as the stone, 60 feet of muscle, silent and swift, moving through the dark water with a fluid power that scattered the Grindylows and sent the giant squid retreating to deeper territory. He mapped the lake's bottom. Found the merpeople's village, a cluster of rough stone dwellings arranged around a central square, lit by luminous algae and decorated with the bones of things that had been large and unlucky. The merpeople watched him from their windows, pale faces rigid with atavistic fear. They knew what he was. Their songs stopped when he passed. He found the square where the hostages would be held, a row of stone pillars with chains, currently empty. He noted the layout, the approaches, the possible escape routes. The cold clarity made it simple, a tactical problem, solvable, manageable. But the unease persisted. Something taken. The tournament organizers were going to take someone important to him and chain them at the bottom of a frozen lake, and the predator in Harry's mind responded to that concept with a possessive fury that frightened him. Not protective fury. Possessive. The distinction mattered. Fleur found him after one of his lake practices, sitting on the shore wrapped in a conjured blanket, steam rising from his skin as his body temperature adjusted from serpent to human. She was carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, because somewhere in the last month she had developed the ability to anticipate his schedule with unsettling accuracy. "You look terrible," she said, sitting beside him. "Thanks. Your eyes are gold again. They're gold a lot these days. I noticed." She handed him a cup. The chocolate was rich and dark, the French kind, the real thing. He didn't ask where she got it. Beauxbatons students had standards. "Tell me what is wrong. And do not say, nothing. I am French. I can smell dishonesty the way you can smell prey." Harry almost smiled. The second task takes something important from each champion. A person, I think. Someone you'd miss. Fleur's blue eyes sharpened. They would not. They would. It's a test. How far will you go, what will you risk, can you perform under emotional pressure? The lake, the mere people, the hostages. Standard heroic quest structure. You are very clinical about this. The basilisk helps with that. He paused. That's the problem, actually. I've been thinking about the task, and the part of me that's a basilisk doesn't think about it the way a person should. It doesn't think rescue someone I care about. It thinks something was taken from my territory and I need to reclaim it. That's not the same thing. Fleur was quiet for a moment. The lake lapped at the shore. Somewhere in the distance, the gamekeeper's hut trailed wood smoke into the gray sky. "When I was 12, she said, a boy at Beauxbatons was rude to my sister Gabrielle. Called her a creature. A half-breed thing. I was across the courtyard and I heard it, and before I could think, my hands were on fire and I was walking toward him and the only thought in my head was burn him." She looked at Harry. Not defend Gabrielle. Not correct an injustice. Just burn. The villa wanted to burn him. And for about 10 seconds, I wanted to let it. What stopped you? Gabrielle. She stepped in front of me. She was 8 years old and she stepped in front of a villa's fire and she said, "Fleur, arrête." And I stopped. Not because the villa wanted to stop. Because I wanted to. Because my sister was more important than the fire. She took his hand. Her fingers were warm, almost hot, the villa metabolism running high. The instinct is not the action, Harry. The thought is not the deed. You feel possessive? Fine. Feel it. Then choose to be protective instead. The choice is what makes you human. Harry looked at her hand in his. The gold in his eyes faded. Not all the way, the permanent ring was always there now, but the hot flicker died down, replaced by the steady green. "You make it sound simple," he said. "It is simple. It is not easy. But it is simple." They sat together in the gray morning, drinking chocolate and watching the lake, and the silence between them was the warmest thing either of them had felt all winter. 3 days before the second task, Victor Crumb attacked Harry in the corridors. It was late, past curfew, the castle dimmed to the low amber of sleeping torchlight. Harry was returning from a meeting with Dumbledore, walking through the third-floor corridor with his mind on runes and prisons and the warmth that was now constant in the lower levels of the castle. His guard was down. The cold clarity was running at maintenance level, background processing, not the sharp focus of active threat assessment. He felt the spell before he saw it. A stunning spell, red and fast, fired from across corridor 10 feet ahead. Harry's body moved before his mind caught up, the basilisk reflexes, faster than human, dropping him into a roll that took the spell over his head by inches. The red bolt hit the wall behind him and blew out a section of stone the size of a dinner plate. Harry came up on his feet, wand drawn, and found Victor Crumb standing in the corridor junction with his wand leveled and his eyes wrong. Wrong. Not vacant, not the blank stare of the Imperius, not the full puppet emptiness that Harry had seen in Barty Crouch Sr. at the World Cup. Crumb's eyes were half-focused, half-present, like a man fighting sleep, and behind the drowsiness was genuine emotion, fear, anger, and a determination that didn't quite match the mechanical precision of his wand movements. Partial Imperius. Someone had put Crumb under, but not completely. The curse was riding his natural impulses, amplifying his existing fear of Harry, removing the restraint that kept that fear from becoming action. Crumb fired again. Not a stunner this time, a bone-breaking curse, purple and vicious, aimed at Harry's chest. Harry deflected it with a shield charm and felt the impact rattle up his wand arm. Crumb was strong. World-class duelist instincts combined with the raw magical power of one of the most talented young wizards in Europe, and the Imperius was removing all hesitation, all second-guessing, turning that talent into a focus weapon. Crumb! Harry shouted. You're being controlled. Fight it. Crumb's face spasmed. For a moment, the drowsiness lifted, and Harry saw confusion, raw, panicked confusion, before the Imperius reasserted and Crumb's wand came up again. The next curse was a reductor. It missed Harry and hit the wall behind him and the stone exploded, not cracked, not chipped, exploded, debris flying outward in a cloud of sharp fragments that cut Harry's cheek and peppered his robes. Crumb was operating without limiters, throwing full-power combat magic in a school corridor, and if one of those curses connected it would do considerably more than stun. Harry could end this in a second. The thought was there, cold and clear and undeniable, partial transformation, just the eyes, the golden stare, and Crumb would be petrified. Frozen. Harmless. It would be the safest option for both of them, safer than trading curses in a narrow corridor where a missed shot could kill a sleeping student through 3 walls. He refused. He would not use the killing gaze on a student. He would not be the monster everyone feared. If he petrified Crumb and the story got out, and it would get out, it always got out, every parent in magical Britain would have confirmation of their worst fear: Harry Potter used his basilisk power on a fellow student. The context wouldn't matter. The justification wouldn't matter. The headline would be everything. So he fought as a wizard. Crumb advanced, firing in combinations, stunning, bone-breaking, entral-expelling, a curse Harry recognized as Bulgarian military standard. The corridor was narrow, limiting lateral movement, and Crumb used that, pressing forward to compress Harry's space, giving him less room to dodge. Harry retreated. Shield, deflect, dodge. The shield charms were holding but each impact cost energy, and Crumb wasn't tiring. The Imperius was suppressing fatigue, pushing Crumb's body past its natural limits, and the spells kept coming, fast, accurate, powerful. Harry needed to change the dynamic. He needed space, or surprise, or both. He got surprise. Serpensortia, Harry hissed, and a snake erupted from his wand, not a conjured snake, not a magical construct, but a summoning, drawn from the small population of serpents that had been manifesting throughout the castle. A 3-foot adder materialized in the air between Harry and Crumb and hit the floor coiling. Crumb flinched. The Imperius flinched with him, serpent fear overriding the curse's programming for a fraction of a second. Harry spoke in Parseltongue. Strike the ground. Loudly. The adder obeyed, lunging at the stone floor with a hiss that echoed through the corridor like a whip crack. The sound, the Parseltongue-charged sound, hit Crumb like a physical blow. The Imperius shattered. Not broke, shattered, fragments of foreign will flying apart like glass, because the Imperius curse worked by imposing one mind on another, and Parseltongue carried an older, deeper authority that the curse couldn't compete with. Crumb staggered. His wand arm dropped. His eyes cleared, all the way, fully, the drowsiness gone, and he looked at Harry with an expression of absolute, horrified comprehension. What? Crumb's voice was hoarse. What did I? Harry lowered his wand. The adder was still at his feet, coiled and watchful. He hissed at it, "Go, find somewhere warm," and it slithered away into a crack in the wall. "You were under the Imperious curse," Harry said. "Partial. Whoever cast it used your existing emotions, your fear of me, to make you attack. The curse amplified what was already there." Crumb was shaking. Not from cold, from the aftermath, the psychic whiplash of having his will overridden and then suddenly restored. He leaned against the wall and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I could have killed you," he said. "You came close. I could have killed a student. A bystander. Anyone in these corridors. But you didn't." Crumb lowered his hands. His dark eyes were anguished, the stoic international Quidditch star stripped back to an 18-year-old kid who had just been used as a weapon. "I remember, pieces. A room. An office. A magical eye. A wand." He pressed his hands into his eyes again. He said a word. Just one word. And then I was walking and I could not stop. Harry went very still. A magical eye. A blue eye. It moved. It moved on its own. Moody. Or rather, the thing wearing Moody's face. The cold clarity locked onto this information with the focus of a missile finding its target. Everything Harry had been sensing, the wrongness, the too warm encouragement, the way Moody watched him, clicked into a pattern that he couldn't quite see the edges of but could feel the shape of, deliberate. Orchestrated. A plan with Harry at its center and the Triwizard Tournament as its framework. "Can you walk?" Harry asked. Crumb straightened. He was pale but composed, the stoicism reasserting itself. "Yes. We need to see Dumbledore." "Duh." They walked together through the darkened corridors. Not as friends, the trust wasn't there, not yet, and might never be. But as two people who had been attacked by the same enemy and understood, on a fundamental level, that the enemy was more important than their differences. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore listened. Snape listened. McGonagall listened. Lysandra, who had been summoned by Patronus, listened. "Moody's office," Harry said. "That's what Crumb remembers. The magical eye. The Imperious curse cast from Moody's wand." The silence that followed was the silence of several very intelligent people arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously and not liking it. "Mad-Eye Moody," McGonagall said slowly, "is one of the most experienced Aurors in history. He would never cast an unforgivable on a student." "No," Snape said. His voice was soft, which was worse than his shout. "He wouldn't." The emphasis on "he" hung in the air like a blade. "You suspect an impostor," Lysandra said. "I have suspected since October," Snape replied. "The man in that office shares Moody's face and voice but not his habits. The real Moody never drinks from a hip flask, his paranoia about poisoning makes him bring his own food. The man in that office drinks from a flask every hour, on the hour. Polyjuice potion requires regular doses to maintain the transformation." "Why didn't you say something?" Harry asked, and his voice was sharper than he intended. Snape's dark eyes met his. "Because suspicion is not proof, Potter. Because accusing a war hero of being an impostor without evidence would have destroyed my credibility and accomplished nothing. And because I was waiting," a glance at Dumbledore, laden with meaning, for the headmaster to reach the same conclusion through his own observations. Dumbledore looked old. Not the ageless, twinkling old of his public persona, actually old. Tired. The weight of mistakes and missed signs settling on his shoulders like snow. "Severus is correct," Dumbledore said. "I have had concerns about Alastor since the start of term. His behavior has been subtly inconsistent, knowledge gaps about shared history, personality shifts too small for most to notice. But I lacked proof, and Alastair has always been eccentric. I convinced myself that the discrepancies were stress-related. The real Moody, Harry said. If there's an imposter, the real one might still be alive. Hidden somewhere. His office, Crumb said. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged, the gesture heavy with Bulgarian practicality. The imposter needs source material for the polyjuice. Hair, skin. The real Moody must be close. An office is private. No one enters without permission. It was, Harry reflected, an excellent point. We can't move yet, Lysandra said. She'd been standing against the wall, arms crossed, processing the information with the rapid efficiency of someone trained for exactly this kind of situation. If we tip off the imposter, he triggers whatever contingency he has in place. Whoever he is, he's been operating under deep cover for months. That takes planning, resources, and, most importantly, a handler. Someone sent him here. Someone is directing the operation. Voldemort, Harry said. The room flinched. Everyone except Dumbledore and Lysandra. Even Snape's jaw tightened, a micro-expression that said more than a paragraph. The Triwizard Tournament was chosen for a reason, Harry continued. I was entered for a reason. Everything that's happened, the tasks, the public spectacle, the magic pouring into the castle, it's a framework. A delivery system. And I'm the package. Dumbledore nodded slowly. I believe you are correct. The tournament's magical framework, the goblet, the tasks, the binding magical contract, generates an enormous amount of ambient energy. That energy is being channeled downward, into the earth, toward the Ophidian's prison. The imposter is feeding the Ophidian, Lysandra said. It wasn't a question. Feeding it, yes. But more than that. I believe the ultimate goal is to use Harry's blood, his blood specifically, carrying the Basilisk synthesis, in a ritual that channels the Ophidian's power. A resurrection ritual. Voldemort doesn't simply want to return. He wants to return with the power of a primordial entity flowing through him. The office was very quiet. Fawkes ruffled his feathers on his perch, a sound like shuffling paper. The silver instruments whirred and clicked. Then we stop the imposter now, McGonagall said. We can't, Lysandra repeated, and the frustration in her voice was tangible. Not without knowing his full plan, his contingencies, his connections. We pull him out now, Voldemort sends someone else, or accelerates the timeline. We need to let the imposter believe he's still in control while we prepare for what's coming. You want to use Harry as bait, Hermione said. Everyone turned. She was standing in the doorway, still in her nightclothes, wand in hand, looking like she'd run from Gryffindor Tower. Behind her, Ron, equally disheveled, wearing one slipper. Miss Granger, McGonagall began. We followed the Patronus, Ron said. Noticed Harry was gone. Found Crumb's blood on the corridor wall. Thought we'd better come. Hermione stepped into the office and fixed Lysandra with a stare that could have melted steel. You want Harry to walk into the third task knowing it's a trap. Knowing the cup is probably a portkey. Knowing that Voldemort is waiting at the other end. Not wanting, Lysandra said. Planning. There's a difference. The difference being? The difference being that if we know it's a trap, we can prepare for it. If we pull the imposter now and Voldemort adjusts, we lose our window. Harry looked at the room, at Dumbledore's grave face, McGonagall's fury, Snape's dark calculations, Lysandra's clinical pragmatism, Hermione's fear, Ron's stubborn loyalty, Crumb's quiet anger. He looked at all of them, and the cold clarity assessed the situation with its usual brutal efficiency, and he made a decision. She's right, Harry said. Hermione whipped toward him. Harry, she's right. We let the imposter think he's winning. We prepare for the third task. And when the trap springs, we spring ours. He looked at Dumbledore. "I'll enter the maze. I'll touch the cup. But I won't be unprepared. And I won't be alone." Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Whatever he saw in Harry's face, the green eyes with their ring of gold, the steady jaw, the absolute absence of fear, made him nod. "Then we plan," the headmaster said. "All of us. Together." The planning consumed the days that followed, threaded through the preparation for the second task in a way that made Harry's head spin. Two separate battles requiring two separate strategies, overlapping in timeline and urgency. The second task came first. The morning of February 24th dawned gray and bitter. The lake was the color of old iron, its surface barely moving. Stands had been erected along the shore, charmed to keep the spectators warm while they watched, or rather, stared at, the flat, featureless water for an hour while the champions did whatever they were going to do beneath it. Harry stood at the water's edge with the other champions and waited for Bagman to finish his breathless introduction. The crowd was enormous, larger than the first task, if possible, drawn by the double spectacle of the tournament and the chance to see what the Basilisk Animagus would do next. He'd learned what was taken an hour ago. Dumbledore had confirmed it with a look that was both apologetic and grim. Fleur was at the bottom of the lake. The knowledge had hit him like a physical blow, and the cold clarity had responded exactly as he'd feared, not with concern, not with protective fury, but with the territorial rage of a predator whose den had been violated. Something was taken. Something that was his. And the deep, serpentine part of Harry's mind wanted it back with an intensity that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with possession. He'd stood in the champion's tent for 2 full minutes, eyes closed, fighting the instinct. Separating mine from hers. Separating the predator's claim from the person's care. She is not an object. She is not territory. She is Fleur, and she matters because she chose to see me, and I will bring her back because I care about her. Not because she belongs to me. Because she matters. The predator subsided. It didn't disappear, it never disappeared, but it retreated to its proper place, a sharp awareness rather than a driving force. Control. Always control. Cedric's hostage was Cho Chang. Crumbs was Hermione, which had surprised Harry until he remembered the Yule Ball and the way Crumb had looked at her during the dancing, not with the hungry blankness of the Velostruck, but with the genuine, slightly bewildered admiration of someone who had found an unexpected equal. The fourth hostage was a small girl Harry didn't recognize, Fleur's sister Gabrielle, he learned later. The cannon fired. For Champion's Dove. Harry didn't dive. He stood at the water's edge and transformed. The crowd, to their credit, didn't scream this time. They'd been expecting it. But there was still a collective intake of breath, 2,000 people simultaneously inhaling, as the boy became the serpent, as 60 feet of dark emerald basilisk uncoiled on the shore and slipped into the black lake with barely a ripple. The water closed over him. Cold, dark, heavy. The basilisk's senses adjusted instantly, heat signature vision replacing light-based sight, vibration detection replacing hearing. The world became a map of pressure waves and thermal gradients, and Harry navigated it with the fluid ease of a year's practice. He was fast in the water. Much faster than on land. The serpentine body was built for this, sinuous, hydrodynamic, propelled by lateral undulation that ate up distance in smooth, powerful strokes. The Merpeople's village was half a mile out and 100 feet down, and Harry covered the distance in under 4 minutes. The Grindylows scattered before him. They felt the pressure wave of something enormous moving through their territory and they fled, green bodies flashing away into the weeds with the panicked speed of creatures that knew, on a cellular level, that they were not at the top of the food chain. The Merpeople were waiting. Harry could feel them, dozens of thermal signatures arranged in a perimeter around the central square, armed with tridents and stone knives, their cold-blooded bodies dim smudges against the even colder water. They didn't attack. They moved aside, pressing against the walls of their stone dwellings, and watched the King of Serpents glide past with wide, unblinking eyes. One of them, the chief, maybe, or the bravest, raised a trident in what might have been a salute or might have been a threat held in reserve. Harry reached the hostage pillars. 4 figures, chained to the stone, eyes closed, suspended in enchanted sleep. The chains were simple, iron, runed, designed to be broken by the champion. Harry's basilisk jaws could have crushed them like paper, but the precision required was beyond his serpent form's fine motor control. He needed hands. He transformed back. The cold hit him instantly, the enchanted warmth of the basilisk form gone, replaced by the searing cold of 100 feet of ice-dark water pressing against bare human skin. He cast a bubblehead charm with shaking hands, drawing the warm air around his face, and swam to Fleur. She was beautiful even in enchanted sleep. Her silver hair floated around her face like a halo, and her expression was peaceful, a peace that Harry knew was artificial, a magical construct, but that still made something in his chest tighten. He touched the chain. It dissolved at his touch, keyed to the champion, designed to release for the right person. Fleur drifted free, and Harry caught her, one arm around her waist, her body warm against his in the freezing water. He looked at the other hostages. Hermione, chained and sleeping. Cho Chang. The small girl, Gabrielle. Cedric and Crumb were somewhere in the lake, fighting their way through Grindylows and enchantments. They would make it. Probably. But probably wasn't good enough for the cold clarity, which was already calculating arrival times and threat assessments and noting that the merpeople looked restless. Harry swam to Gabrielle's pillar. The girl was young, 11, maybe 12, and the enchanted sleep sat heavily on her small frame. She looked vulnerable in a way that triggered the protective instinct hard enough to override the possessive one entirely. He touched her chain. It didn't dissolve. Not his hostage. Harry looked at the merpeople. The chief, if that's what he was, shook his head. A warning, take your own, leave the rest. Harry drew his wand. He pointed it at the chain and said, Defindo, and the severing charm cut through the iron like wire through cheese. The merpeople surged forward, tridents raised, but Harry was already moving, Fleur under one arm, Gabrielle under the other, kicking for the surface with the desperate strength of someone who was freezing to death and running out of borrowed air. He transformed mid-ascent. Not fully, a partial transformation, just enough to coat his skin in scales, to give his body the serpent's cold resistance and the powerful lateral thrust of a 60-foot tail. He shot upward like a torpedo, the 2 unconscious women cradled against his chest, and broke the surface in an explosion of spray that drenched the spectators in the nearest stand. Harry hit the dock hard, rolling, pulling Fleur and Gabrielle out of the water and onto the wooden planks. He transformed fully back to human, gasped, and immediately cast warming charms on all 3 of them with hands that trembled so badly he nearly dropped his wand. Fleur woke up first. The enchanted sleep broke like a bubble, and she went from unconscious to fully alert in less than a second, Vila reflexes, maybe, or just Fleur being Fleur. She sat up, looked around wildly, saw Gabrielle lying beside her, and made a sound that Harry had never heard from her before, a raw, desperate, human sound, stripped of composure and control. She grabbed her sister and held her, and the tears came, and the relief was so visceral that Harry had to look away. Then she looked at Harry. He was kneeling on the dock, soaking wet, shaking with cold, wearing the remnants of conjured robes that hadn't survived the transformation. His eyes were gold, fully gold, the green gone, the predator's gaze burning in his skull. He couldn't make them change back. The adrenaline was too high, the instincts too loud. Fleur reached out and took his face in her hands. Her palms were warm. The Vila fire, burning just beneath the skin. You saved her, she said. You didn't have to. She was not your hostage. I know. You came back for her. Of course I did. She kissed him. It was not a romance novel kiss. It was cold and wet and tasted like lake water, and neither of them was at their most attractive. But it was real, fiercely, unmistakably real, and the warmth of it reached places that the warming charm couldn't touch. When she pulled back, his eyes were green again. "Ah," she said, with a small, trembling smile. "There you are." The crowd was cheering. Harry barely heard it. The world had narrowed to the point of contact between Fleur's hands and his face, and for a moment, the cold clarity went quiet, and Harry was just a boy who had done something brave and been kissed for it. Then the world reasserted itself, as it always did. Cedric surfaced with Cho 5 minutes later, having battled through a contingent of particularly aggressive Grindylows. Crumb arrived last, Hermione under one arm, sporting a partial shark head transformation that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. He'd used a transfiguration approach, not as elegant as Harry's Animagus form, but effective. The scoring was more straightforward than the first task. Harry received top marks for speed and for retrieving an additional hostage. The moral dimension, going back for someone who wasn't his responsibility, earned him a perfect 10 from Dumbledore and, surprisingly, from Maxime. Karkaroff was absent. The judge's table had an empty chair where the Durmstrang headmaster should have been sitting. Harry noticed. The cold clarity noted and filed. And beneath everything, beneath the scoring and the cheering and the towels and the hot chocolate and the small, warm place where Fleur's kiss lived in his memory, Harry felt the Ophidian. It was stronger now. The second task had been a massive magical event, hundreds of enchantments, thousands of spectators, ambient magic, the binding framework of the tournament itself pumping energy into the castle's foundations. And the Ophidian had fed. Harry could feel it the way you feel a building storm, a pressure change, a deepening of the warmth, a sense of something vast shifting position in its sleep. Not waking. Not yet. But rolling over. The golden tendrils he'd seen during his lake dive, threads of light rising from the lake bed, passing through silt and rock, climbing toward the castle, were visible to him now even in human form if he concentrated. Faint, pulsing, alive. The Ophidian's influence, spreading like roots through the magical substrate of the earth. One of those tendrils had brushed against him during the dive. Just a touch, the lightest contact, a golden thread crossing his path as he rose toward the surface. And in that moment of contact, he'd heard it. Not words. Not Parseltongue. Something older and deeper, a communication that bypassed language entirely and went straight to the part of his brain that was serpent. Recognition. Kinship. Welcome home. It had felt like being seen. Not the way Fleur saw him, with choice and effort and deliberate clarity. The way a mother sees a child. The way water recognizes water. An identity so fundamental that it required no introduction. Harry had torn free. Had kept swimming, kept moving, kept human. But the echo of that contact lingered like a fingerprint on glass, and in the quiet moments, lying in bed, sitting in class, walking the corridors alone, he could still feel it. Welcome home. He hadn't told anyone. Not Dumbledore, not Hermione, not Fleur. Because telling them would mean admitting that part of him, the cold, serpentine, honest part, had wanted to stay. Karkaroff's body was found the morning after the second task. A Ravenclaw prefect on early rounds discovered the Durmstrang headmaster in an unused classroom on the 4th floor, slumped against the wall, eyes open, left sleeve pulled back to expose the dark mark. The mark was fully manifested, black and vivid, the skull and serpent standing out against the dead white skin like a brand. Cause of death was not immediately apparent. No visible wounds, no signs of a struggle. Madame Pomfrey's diagnostic spells revealed a systemic magical cascade, every organ shutting down simultaneously, as if the body had simply decided to stop. The dark mark, when examined by Dumbledore, showed signs of active magical discharge. Someone, or something, had used the mark as a conduit and poured enough dark magic through it to burn out every system it touched. Voldemort had reached through the mark and killed Karkaroff from a distance. A punishment for cowardice, or an elimination of a loose end, or simply a demonstration of power. The message was clear: I am coming back, and no one who betrayed me is safe. The castle went into lockdown. The Durmstrang students were confined to their ship. Maxime threatened to withdraw the Beauxbatons delegation. Fudge arrived from London looking like he'd swallowed a toad and demanded explanations that nobody could provide. The official story, worked out in Dumbledore's office between the headmaster, the ministry, and the heads of the visiting delegations, was that Karkaroff had died of complications arising from dark magical exposure during his earlier career. It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it, and the lie sat in the air between them like a dead thing. Harry wasn't in the room. He was in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall, listening through the door with the enhanced hearing that his basilisk nature provided. He heard Fudge bluster. He heard Maxime's furious French. He heard Dumbledore's quiet, measured voice threading the needle between truth and necessity. And he heard Snape, barely a whisper, meant only for Dumbledore, say 4 words that changed everything. The mark is burning. Snape's dark mark. Active. Which meant Voldemort was reaching out to his followers, which meant the timeline was accelerating, which meant the third task wasn't just a trap, it was a deadline. Harry pushed off the wall and went to find Fleur. She was in the courtyard, sitting on a stone bench in the thin February sun, her sister Gabrielle beside her. The younger girl was holding Fleur's hand and talking rapidly in French, the words too fast for Harry to follow even if he'd spoken the language. Fleur was listening with the patient attention of an older sibling who understood that sometimes the most important thing you could do was be present. She looked up when Harry approached, and something in his face must have told her everything, because she said a few quiet words to Gabrielle, kissed the girl's forehead, and stood. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Everything. Karkaroff's death, Snape's mark, the impostor Moody, Voldemort's plan, the Ophidian. All of it, delivered in the flat, factual tone that the cold clarity demanded, standing in the courtyard of a castle that was slowly being undermined from within by a force older than civilization. Fleur listened without interrupting. She stood with her arms folded and her head tilted slightly to one side, and she listened, and when he was done, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "What do you need?" she asked. "Not what do you feel or are you afraid or how can I help? What do you need? Practical, direct, actionable. The question of a partner, not a bystander." "I need someone I trust to be prepared for the third task," Harry said. "Not in the maze, outside it. If the cup is a portkey and it takes me somewhere, I need people ready to respond. Dumbledore and Snape will handle the impostor. Lysandra has Covenant resources. But I need," he stopped. The word he wanted felt too large. "You need someone who will come for you," Fleur finished. "Yes. Then I will be there." She said it the way she said everything, with absolute conviction, without flinching, without the theatrical bravado that most people use to mask their fear. She was afraid, he could see it in the slight tension around her eyes, the too careful stillness of her hands. But fear and conviction coexisted in her the way fire and ice coexisted in him, and neither one won. "The Ophidian," she said. "You said it reached for you. In the lake." "Yes." "What did it feel like?" Harry hesitated. The honest answer was complicated. The honest answer involved the word home, and he wasn't sure he was ready to say that out loud. "It felt like being recognized," he said. "Like something that had been looking for me for a long time finally found me." Fleur was quiet. She reached out and took his hand, the gesture automatic now, a connection they'd established through weeks of shared silence and stolen conversations and the mutual understanding that they were both more than human and less than comfortable with it. "You are not its key," she said. "You are not its guardian. You are not its child. You are Harry, and you belong to yourself. Whatever that thing wants from you, it does not get to ave you." The gold flickered in his eyes. He felt it, the warmth, the pull, the distant whisper of welcome home. And he felt Fleur's hand, warm in his, and the two warmths competed, and for now, for today, the human one won. "Yeah," he said. "Okay. Okay," she repeated, and squeezed his hand, and they stood together in the thin February sun and did not let go. 3 weeks before the third task, Harry fought Lysandra Voss in the room of requirement. It wasn't an attack. It was a request. "If you won't let me strip your powers," Lysandra had said, standing in Dumbledore's office with her snakeskin coat and her flat grey eyes, "then at least let me test them. Properly. Under controlled conditions. I need to know what you can do, and more importantly, what you can't." Dumbledore had approved. Snape had been invited to observe. Fleur had insisted on being present, and nobody had the nerve to argue with her. The room of requirement provided a space that looked like a cross between a dueling chamber and a gladiatorial arena, high-ceilinged, stone-walled, with a packed earth floor and observation balconies on 3 sides. Torches burned in iron brackets, casting long shadows. Harry stood at one end. Lysandra at the other. "Rules," Lysandra said. "No killing gaze. No full petrification gaze. You may transform freely. I will use Covenant combat techniques, which are specifically designed for engagement with Basilisk-class threats. If either of us yields, the fight ends. If I determine you've lost control, the fight ends and I act accordingly. Accordingly meaning you kill me. Accordingly meaning I do what I have to. Don't lose control and it won't be an issue." Harry looked at Snape, who stood on the observation balcony with his arms crossed and an expression of intense professional interest. He looked at Fleur, whose jaw was set and whose right hand was already trailing sparks of Vila fire. "Begin," Dumbledore said from the balcony, and Lysandra attacked. She was fast. Faster than anyone Harry had fought, including Krum. Her wand work was unconventional, curved, flowing movements that matched the curve of her unusual wand, generating spells that twisted in the air like serpents. The first curse spiraled toward him in a helix pattern, and his shield charm, designed for linear spells, couldn't quite catch the rotation. The curse grazed his shoulder and his left arm went numb from elbow to fingertips. A nerve-deadening hex. Covenant specialty. Designed to disable a basilisk's muscles in segments, preventing transformation by making the body unable to complete the change. Harry switched his wand to his right hand and fired back, a disarming charm, a blasting curse, a chain of stunners aimed at her legs. Lysandra dodged the first 2 and deflected the stunners with a shield charm that was serpentine itself, a shimmering barrier that moved and coiled and redirected the spells into the floor. "You fight like a student," Lysandra said, circling. "Direct. Linear. You aim where I am, not where I'll be." Harry adjusted. The cold clarity was fully engaged now, reading Lysandra's movements, predicting her patterns, and he learned. That was the thing about the basilisk mind, it was a predator, and predators learned. Within 30 seconds, he'd mapped her movement preferences, left favoring, circular, aggressive. She liked to close distance. She fought like a snake, fluid, indirect, lethal at close range. He let her close the distance. Then he transformed. Not fully. A partial transformation, scales erupting across his arms and chest, his eyes going gold, his reflexes shifting from human to serpent. He didn't grow, didn't elongate, didn't lose his limbs. He became something in between, a boy armored in basilisk scales, moving with basilisk speed, seeing with basilisk clarity. Lysandra's eyes widened, a fraction, barely visible, but enough. "You can do partial transformations." Harry didn't answer. He moved, serpent fast, closing the gap between them in a blur that the human eye couldn't track, and his scaled fist connected with her shield charm hard enough to shatter it. The barrier broke in a spray of silver fragments, and Lysandra stumbled back and Harry was already there, inside her guard, too close for wand work. She dropped her wand. Deliberate. Her hands came up, bare, unprotected, and she pressed her palms against his scaled chest and spoke a word in a language Harry didn't know. The suppression field hit him like a wall of ice. Not a collar this time. A word. A Covenant verbal trigger designed to interfere with Animagus transformation at the neurological level. Harry felt his scales retract, felt the gold drain from his eyes, felt the basilisk nature being shoved back into its cage by force. He staggered. The partial transformation collapsed, leaving him human, gasping, momentarily defenseless. Lyssandra's hands were still on his chest. She could have killed him. She had Covenant killing techniques that worked on contact, he'd read about them in the files she'd shared. A touch to the throat, a whispered word, and the Animagus core would collapse inward and take the wizard's life with it. She didn't kill him. She stepped back. You recovered from a verbal suppression in under 2 seconds, she said. Her voice was slightly breathless. She was human after all, capable of being impressed. The Brazilian boy took 15. The Russian took 8. You took less than 2. Harry straightened. The basilisk nature was roaring back, flooding his system with heat and clarity and the sharp-edged fury of a predator that had been caged. He pushed the fury down. Control. Always control. The partial transformation, Lysandra continued. You can maintain a hybrid form. Human body, basilisk attributes. Selective, controlled, modular. None of the others could do that. They were either human or serpent. Nothing in between. I practiced. Clearly. She picked up her wand. Studied him for a long moment. How? Trial and error. 400 transformations teaches you where the boundaries are. Where you can stop the change, hold it, redirect it. The basilisk form isn't binary, it's a spectrum. Full serpent at one end, full human at the other, and everything in between is available if you have the control to hold the position. That shouldn't be possible. I've been told that a lot. Lysandra looked up at the observation balcony. Snape's expression was opaque. Fleur's was fierce. Dumbledore was smiling, the small, genuine smile of a man who had just watched his worst fear fail to materialize. You're different, Lysandra said to Harry. The words came reluctantly, dragged from behind years of professional certainty. I don't know why, and I don't entirely trust it. But you are different from the others. Different enough to stop trying to kill me. Different enough to make me reconsider my timeline. She holstered her wand. The evaluation continues. But I've made another note. From the balcony, Fleur's voice, what does the note say? Lysandra looked up at her. The two women regarded each other, the killer and the firebird, the surgeon and the flame. The note says, inconclusive but promising, Lysandra said. Which, in Covenant terminology, means I'm not going to kill him today. How reassuring, Fleur said, in a tone that could have frozen the Black Lake solid. Lysandra's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. They didn't become allies that day. But they stopped being enemies, which, in a world of escalating threats and shrinking timelines, was close enough. The weeks before the third task passed in a blur of preparation and dread. Harry trained. Not just transformation, everything. Dueling with Snape, who was as brutal a teacher as expected but also as effective, drilling Harry in occlumency techniques that reinforced his mental barriers against both the Imperius Curse and the Ophidian's influence. Strategy sessions with Dumbledore, mapping the contingencies for the third task. Combat practice with Lysandra, who taught him 3 Covenant techniques that she was technically forbidden to share with outsiders and didn't seem to care. He worked on the Golden Egg puzzle with Hermione, who had constructed a timeline of the tournament's magical output and was tracking its correlation with the Ophidian's stirring. Her chart, a massive parchment that covered an entire wall of the Room of Requirement, showed an exponential curve, magic in, awakening out. The third task would be the peak. The largest, most complex magical event of the tournament, pumping energy into the castle's foundations like fuel into a furnace. Ron helped in ways that were quintessentially Ron. He brought food to late-night strategy sessions, he watched Harry's back in the corridors, and he said the things that nobody else would say. You might die, Ron said one evening, sitting in the room of requirement while Harry practiced partial transformations. I might. That's not, I mean, I know you know that. I just wanted to say it out loud because everyone else is being so bloody strategic about everything, and I think someone should just say, my best mate might die next month, and that's terrifying. Harry stopped mid-transformation. Scales receding, gold fading, humans settling back into place. He looked at Ron. I'm scared too, Harry said. Are you? Because you never look scared. You look controlled. Focused. Like a predator getting ready to hunt. Which is probably the basilisk thing, but honestly, mate, it's a bit hard to comfort someone who looks like they could eat you. Harry laughed. It surprised both of them, a real laugh, sudden and bright, cutting through the tension like sunlight through cloud. I'm still me, Harry said. Under all of it. Still scared. Still human. Still the kid who didn't know he was a wizard until Hagrid broke down the door. I know, Ron said. That's why I'm worried. Because the scared human kid is the one who's going to face Voldemort, and the basilisk can't help with the scared part. He was right. And Harry didn't have a response, so he just stood there with his best friend in a magical room in a magical castle, and the silence between them was the silence of people who have said the important thing and don't need to say anything else. The night before the third task, Harry went to the chamber. He'd stayed away for weeks, on Dumbledore's advice. But he needed to see it. Needed to feel the scale of what he was facing. The chamber was warm. Not castle warm, not cozy. Hot. The air shimmered, and the stone underfoot radiated heat like asphalt in August. The serpent pillars were cracked from floor to ceiling, the carved scales gaping, and through every crack, golden light poured. The runes on the far wall were blazing. Not glowing, blazing, each symbol burning with its own inner fire, the serpentine script writhing as if the letters themselves were alive. The heat from behind the wall was a physical pressure, a breath, a heartbeat. Harry walked through the chamber alone. No Dobby tonight. No Dumbledore. Just him and the dark and the gold and the warmth. He stopped at the wall. Placed his hand flat against the stone. The contact was electric. The Ophidian's presence flooded through him, not hostile, not aggressive, not the predatory surge he'd feared. Something else. Something immense and lonely and ancient, a consciousness that had been asleep for a millennium and was slowly, painfully, becoming aware that it was alone. Not alone, it said. Or felt. Or was. Harry didn't pull away. He stood with his hand on the burning stone and he listened. Not with his ears, not with his Parseltongue. With the part of him that was serpent, the part that the world feared and the ministry wanted to cage and Lysandra wanted to cut away. He listened with the cold clarity at full intensity, and what he heard was not a monster. It was a song. A low, vast, ancient song, wordless and deep, rising from the earth like heat from magma. The song of something that had existed before humans, before wizards, before the concept of magic had been named and categorized and taught in schools. A song of pure being, the elemental serpent nature that underpinned Parseltongue and Basilisk biology and Dragon Fury and Vela fire and 1,000 other magical phenomena that the wizarding world classified and catalogued without ever understanding their common root. The Ophidian wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was vast, and its vastness was the danger, the way an ocean isn't evil but will still drown you, the way the sun isn't malicious but will still burn you to ash if you get too close. Harry understood, standing there with his hand on the wall, why every Basilisk Animagus before him had lost control. They hadn't been overwhelmed by the predator instinct. They'd been overwhelmed by this, the song, the recognition, the terrible, seductive sense of belonging. The Ophidian offered what every person who carried something inhuman inside them craved most, a place where the monster wasn't monstrous. A home for the thing that had no home. Welcome, the song said. Welcome home. Harry closed his eyes. The gold was blazing behind his eyelids. The warmth in his chest was a sun, nuclear and irresistible. Every cell in his body was vibrating with the frequency of the song, and the frequency said stay, 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 you are ours, you are home, stay, not yet, Harry whispered. The song paused. Not stopped, paused. Like a held breath. Like a question mark. I hear you, Harry said. His hand was still on the stone. The heat was almost unbearable, but he didn't pull away. I hear you and I don't hate you and I don't fear you. But I can't stay. Not yet. Not like this. The warmth pulsed. Why? Because there are people up there who need me to be human. And being human means choosing, even when the other option feels like coming home. Silence. Not absence, fullness. The Ophidian processing, in its vast, ancient way, a concept it had never encountered, a serpent child who acknowledged kinship and chose distance. A key that fit the lock and refused to turn. The warmth receded. Slowly, reluctantly, like the tide going out. The runes dimmed from blazing to glowing. The heat decreased from unbearable to merely warm. The song dropped from a roar to a whisper. Harry pulled his hand away. The stone was cool where he'd touched it. He stood in the chamber of secrets, alone, and breathed, and his eyes were gold, fully, completely, unmistakably gold, and he let them be gold for a long moment before pulling himself back to green. The ring of gold around his irises, when he looked in the mirror later, was slightly brighter than before. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in his four-poster and stared at the canopy and listened to the castle breathing around him, the creak of ancient wood, the murmur of portraits, the distant drip of water in stone pipes. And beneath it all, so faint that he might have been imagining it, the song. Always the song. Tomorrow was the third task. Tomorrow was the maze. Tomorrow was the trap he was walking into with his eyes open and his wand drawn and the king of serpents coiled in his chest like a loaded gun. He thought about Fleur, asleep in the Beauxbatons carriage. He thought about Ron and Hermione in their dormitories. He thought about Dumbledore, probably awake, probably planning, probably burdened by the knowledge that he was sending a 14-year-old into a battle with forces that made Dark Lords look small. He thought about the boy in Brazil. 14 years old. Gold eyes. A song he couldn't stop hearing. I am not him, Harry thought. I am not them. I choose. Every time. I choose. The gold flickered behind his closed eyelids. Then green. Then nothing. He slept. Chapter 4, Eyes of Gold, Core Conflict Type, Large-Scale Threat/Emotional Stakes/Final Confrontation Across Multiple Front Summary, Everything Converges. The day of the third task. Multiple plans running simultaneously, Harry's plan, enter the maze, reach the cup, which he knows is a port key, but on his own terms. Dumbledore, Lysandra, and Snape are prepared to expose Crouch Jr. the moment the task begins, freeing Harry to face Voldemort with backup coming. Voldemort's plan, Harry touches the cup, arrives at the ritual site. Blood taken. Resurrection performed with the Ophidians' power channeled through the rift. The Ophidians' plan, it isn't truly conscious, not yet. But it's reaching, and the third task's massive magical framework, 3 schools worth of enchantments, is the final push its prison needs to crack. The complication, Crouch Jr. is more prepared than anyone expected. He's embedded failsafes throughout the maze and has a contingency for his exposure. When Snape and Dumbledore move to capture him, he triggers a cascade of dark magic through the maze that cuts Harry off from outside help and begins actively feeding energy into the Ophidians' prison. The maze is corrupted, the hedges are alive with dark magic, the creatures inside are enhanced and maddened. Harry fights through them with Cedric, whom he warned before the task started. Their alliance is genuine. Cedric doesn't fully understand what's happening, but he trusts Harry. They face a corrupted Sphinx, a blast-ended Skrut that's been magically enlarged, and sections of the maze that seem to be alive, reshaping themselves to funnel Harry toward the cup. Fleur was in the maze but got pulled out by the corrupted hedges. She fights her way free with Vila Fire and joins the effort outside, working with Lysandra to disrupt Crouch Jr.'s enchantments. Crumb, free of the Imperius but still injured from Chapter 3, guards the maze's perimeter. Harry reaches the cup. He tells Cedric to go back. Cedric refuses. "I'm a Hufflepuff, Potter. We don't abandon people." Harry forces the issue, a partial transformation, just enough to let the gold blaze in his eyes. Not the killing gaze, but the command presence of a basilisk. Cedric freezes. Not dead. Not petrified. Just, unable to move, held by the weight of a predator's will. Harry says, "I'm sorry. You can't follow where I'm going." He touches the cup. The graveyard. It's worse than expected. The ritual site is enormous, carved runes spiraling outward for hundreds of yards, all in the serpentine script Harry now reads instinctively. Wormtail is there. Death Eaters in a circle. And in the center, a cauldron that doesn't just contain potion, it contains a rift. A tear in reality through which golden light pours upward. The Ophidian's power, physically manifest. The ritual proceeds. Bone of the father. Flesh of the servant, Wormtail, weeping. Blood of the enemy, they try to take Harry's by force. He fights. Transforms fully. The Death Eaters who meet his gaze die where they stand. But Wormtail, shielded by Voldemort's magic, manages to cut Harry during the chaos and add blood to the cauldron. Voldemort rises. But not as a man. He emerges from the cauldron wreathed in golden light, the Ophidian's power flowing into him. He's partially bonded with the primordial force, not fully, the prison isn't fully broken, but enough. He's something between a Dark Lord and a god. His magic warps reality around him. The air screams. Harry faces him as the Basilisk. The battle is cataclysmic, the killing gaze versus Voldemort's stolen divine power. Voldemort can't be killed by the gaze, the Ophidian's power shields him. Harry can't be destroyed by Voldemort's magic, his basilisk form is too magically resistant. They're locked in a war of attrition that's tearing the graveyard apart. Meanwhile, at Hogwarts, the ground splits open. The rift beneath the castle is cracking. Dumbledore, Fleur, Lysandra, McGonagall, and others fight to contain it. Lysandra uses covenant sealing magic, ancient techniques she swore to protect. She teaches Fleur a crucial component because Fleur's Vila heritage gives her a natural affinity for creature magic. Fleur channels fire into the seal, and together they begin closing the rift from the Hogwarts end. In the graveyard, Harry realizes he can't win through force. Voldemort is too powerful with the Ophidian's backing. But the Ophidian isn't choosing Voldemort, it's being siphoned. Voldemort carved the runes, built the conduit, and is taking the power by force. Harry makes his choice. Instead of fighting Voldemort, he reaches out to the Ophidian. Not with command. Not with Parseltongue force. With recognition. He opens his mind, the part that's serpent, the part that's been afraid of itself all year, and shows the Ophidian what he is, not a prison guard, not a thief, but a child of its legacy. Kin. The Ophidian responds. The golden light in the rift shifts, instead of flowing toward Voldemort, it flows toward Harry. Not to empower him, but to withdraw. The Ophidian chooses to pull back, to return to sleep, because Harry asked rather than commanded. The power drains out of Voldemort like water from a broken cup. Voldemort screams. He's still resurrected, the ritual worked, but he's diminished. Mortal. Flesh and bone and fury, but nothing divine. He's dangerous but no longer apocalyptic. Priori Incantatem triggers when their wands connect. Harry grabbed his wand during the chaos. The shades emerge, Cedric's parents, who aren't dead, so they don't appear, confirming Harry saved Cedric, but others, Bertha Jorkins, the old muggle. James and Lily. The shades give Harry time. He seizes the portkey cup, it works both ways. Another thing Crouch Jr. didn't account for, because the return trip was supposed to deliver Harry's body back to Hogwarts as a trophy. Harry lands in the maze. But the maze is destroyed, the dark magic consumed it when the rift began closing. He's in the middle of the Quidditch pitch, surrounded by rubble and panicking spectators. He's bleeding, exhausted, and his eyes are solid gold. Fleur reaches him first. She ran from the castle the moment the rift began closing, knowing he'd come back. She doesn't care about the golden eyes or the blood or the crowd. She reaches him, and he reaches back. Aftermath sequences, Crouch Jr. is captured. The real Moody is rescued. Under Veritaserum, the full conspiracy is revealed. Fudge tries to suppress the truth, Voldemort's return is politically inconvenient. Harry, standing before the minister with eyes that still flicker gold, tells Fudge exactly what will happen if the ministry tries to hide this. It's not a threat. It's a statement of fact delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who just faced down a would-be god. Fudge folds. Lysandra officially breaks with the Covenant's kill order on Harry. She tells her superiors that Harry is the first Basilisk Animagus in recorded history to maintain control, and that he may be the only thing standing between the world and the Ophidians' eventual awakening. The Covenant is divided, some accept her assessment, others begin planning independently. A future conflict is seeded. Harry and Dumbledore's final conversation, Dumbledore admits he was wrong to let Harry face so much alone. Harry admits he was wrong to keep the Basilisk secret for so long. They discuss what's coming, Voldemort is back, the Ophidian is asleep but aware, the Covenant is fractured, and Harry is now the most feared and famous wizard in Britain. Dumbledore asks Harry what he wants. Harry says, "I want to be someone who chooses, not someone who reacts." Dumbledore smiles sadly. "Then you're already better than most of us." Final scene, Harry in the Chamber of Secrets. The rooms are dark. The stone is cool. The Ophidian sleeps. But Harry can feel it, a warmth in his chest, a presence at the edge of his mind, patient and vast. He's the guardian now. Not because he was forced into it, but because he chose it. Fleur finds him there. She's not surprised he came down here. She sits beside him on the cold stone floor. "It's still there," he says. "I know," she says. "So am I." Harry's eyes are green again. But in the depths, if you look closely, there's a ring of gold that never quite goes away. Thematic throughline: the monster you choose to be. Every character in this story carries something dangerous inside them, Harry's basilisk nature, Fleur's Vila heritage, Voldemort's obsession with immortality, Lysandra's willingness to kill for the greater good. The story argues that what makes you human isn't the absence of the monster, it's the choice you make about what to do with it. Harry doesn't win by suppressing the serpent. He wins by accepting it and choosing, every single day, to be more than his instincts. Ready when you are. Say the word and I'll write the end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.